All right, we're here for the next episode of Sebastian Sierp. So glad you could join us. Today we have a really special guest, Neil Chethik, author, father, husband, and director of the Carnegie Center for Literacy and Learning right here in Lexington, Kentucky. Neil, thank you so much for being on the show with us. We really do appreciate it.
Really appreciate it.
I'm really glad to be here.
Yeah, we're going to have a good time.
Yeah.
So, I've known you now for a little while, and I think we initially had kind of talked because we were both involved in the Mankind Project.
That's right.
And I wanted to start off by asking you, because I'm always interested in asking guys who have gone through the men's weekend how they came to go through it or how they got hooked up with it. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I could tell you a little bit about that. It probably goes, you may not have heard one quite like mine. I spent 1985 to 1991 living in the Bay Area of California, and I was covering the all kinds of religion and spiritual stories.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, in the East Bay and throughout the Bay Area for the San Jose Mercury News, which was a newspaper I worked for at the time. And at that time, it was Silicon Valley in its absolute massive bloom, first bloom.
Wow.
And it was quite an amazing. The paper almost every day was 3 inches thick because there's so many want ads for so many new products. And
so you were there in the days when Microsoft was getting started.
Right.
Wow.
And we were flush and working out there. And one of the jobs I had was to cover things that were going on that seemed interesting to me, which is a pretty great place to be when you're writing. And I started covering Robert Bly and his quote-unquote men's movement at the time, which was Robert Bly being a member of I would say a feminist really from the 50s and 60s as a poet. Mm-hmm. But in the 70s and 80s, he got more into what's up with men in reaction to the women's movement, and then became very involved in mentoring a lot of men who he began to see as sort of soft, which we can get into a whole other thing. However, what happened was I started writing about him and the movement and went to some weekends and met a lot of men, and at the same time I was about 28, 29 years old. So it was a time where I was looking at myself as a man. I was in a relationship, not married, and I learned enough so that a year later when I moved to Lexington, Kentucky, and looked around and saw no men doing this kind of work, I wrote an article for a paper, for the local Ace magazine, actually.
Ace, yeah.
What Lexington needs. And I wrote a men's movement. And they had a picture of me in front of a train blasting by behind me, and it was kind of a dramatic picture.
Cool.
And we had a meeting and about 50 men showed up, including people like Ernie Perry and, is that his name? Yes.
Yeah, Ernie Perry,
and,
yeah.
Yeah,
Sure.
several other men, Michael Fogler, from early in Lexington's men's movement. And we met as a group on and off, maybe 20 or 25 of us during the early 90s until about 1995 or 6 when Ernie became the first one to go into the men's weekend.
Okay.
He found the New Warrior. We were meeting more monthly, having discussion groups, doing things together. And so we had a men's community, but it hadn't had this seminal experience, which is what the weekend was. So the New Warrior weekend brought several of us together. 6 or so of us went on the one weekend in 1996 in Bedford, Indiana.
Right.
You know.
Sure. Yeah.
And then came out the other side as a gelled men's group, and I still, 25 years later, have dinner probably 4 or 5 times a year with
those guys.
Those guys.
Oh, that's awesome.
So that was my weekend. Is this going to be all right?
It should still be, yeah.
All right. You just tell me where. Okay.
There you go.
So it was a long story short. I met, when we came out of that, our other men's group kind of merged almost with this group, and I too with it, because the depth of the men's work that I did at New Warrior was enough to sort of keep me invigorated and looking at myself. And I was probably in men's groups after that on a regular sort of monthly basis for maybe 10 to 15 years.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
I want to
Yeah.
stay on this topic,
Yeah.
but I'm afraid I'm going to forget it, and I want to ask you about it. There was a guy I thought he was in the Bay Area, but he might have been in L.A., Walter Martin. And I was wondering if you ever heard him. And the reason I'm asking is because his dad told me that he had been in this guy's class, but he was a very famous writer, and he wrote this book called Kingdom of the Cults in that area. And he told me he had gone to that. This was probably like late 60s, early 70s.
Yeah, that was a
and
little
so,
different.
but he was still there,
Yeah.
I think, up until the early 90s.
Okay.
So
But, yeah.
when did this whole thing start? I mean, what are the origins of the Mankind
men's-
Project? Yeah.
The Mankind Project itself actually might go back to the 80s.
85.
Where the group of people from Wisconsin
Right,
who were creating this work themselves.
right.
And what they were doing is they were saying, we've got a lot of men stuff inside, like we are looking at again today. We've got a lot of stuff going inside, and it's women can't really help us with each other. We need each other to get this out and up and examined and get it somewhat resolved. Because right now, I think we're getting close to the place where women have enough power to start really fucking with us, with men. And they should, because, women walk around with the threat of violence in at least this culture.
Oh, yeah.
And
many other cultures.
and many other cultures,
Right.
but this is the only one I know, and that's been happening my whole lifetime. While I have never perpetrated violence against a woman, I'm in the culture, so what part of
It's always there.
what's the ecosystem? And I'm sure I've frightened women. I know I've frightened my wife before, you raise your voice, whatever, and she's heard that people raise voices and then they...
Women frighten me too.
And
It's
women
okay.
frighten you.
Well, I bet I'm more frightened, as a matter of fact.
Different kind of frightened. Different kind of frightened.
It is a different
I
kind of
understand
frightened.
you
There
can
are all
defend
kinds of
yourself.
frightening.
Yeah. Well, there's a certain limit.
Yeah.
And there are different types of defense.
Right.
But no, I think you're absolutely right, because I believe that in our culture in America, because it's so insular, what happens is ladies have a feeling of being safe in a lot of ways. So, having now taught self-defense for a long time, what always happens when I teach a ladies-only self-defense clinic or seminar is you'll get all of these ladies that will show up who wouldn't show up if guys were there. And you also get these ladies who usually have some kind of backstory going on as to why they're there. Like every now and then you get the girl who came in with her girlfriend to have some fun.
Yeah.
But most of the time, after you've known her for 3 or 4 sessions or something like that,
Yeah.
the story will come out, and it'll be something along the lines of I was raped or hurt or a guy chased me or something. And so there was a wake-up call for the woman to come and do that.
Right.
That's the story you get again and again and again.
I wonder should there be some kind of wake-up call for men to deal with women having that? You know what I mean? It's like, that's what I see maybe happening right now, is that there's some kind of, I get the sense as a man, for the first time really, that a lot of women just don't like me, white man, just would rather...
You mean you white man or you man?
Mostly white man.
Oh,
I
so
think
there's
black man is another, but being a white
So there's
man.
a cultural,
I think there's a
sort of
cultural
an
push.
ethnic shift of some kind.
Well, I don't know about ethnic, but gender. They're just...
Oh, just gender-wise.
Yeah, I'm just saying that gender-wise they've come...
But when you say white, I mean, is there something particular to white
Yeah.
other than other races, you think?
Yeah, because we're allegedly the ones with the power.
Oh, okay. So the white privilege.
we are
Yeah,
now at the
patriarchy.
place where we are teetering
with that power just a little bit.
Mhm.
We're trying to hang on. I think there's a hanging on part of it. I'm not saying that we should be trying to hang on. I'm a little bit more of the let's share the power, because first of all, it's easier when you share the power, I think.
It takes so much
My
energy to hang on.
experience.
It really
Yeah.
does.
And, it's worse. The result is usually worse when you don't share the power.
Sure.
For a variety of reasons. So, that's a long.
I have a Matt Lauer story.
Oh, let's hear that first.
Yeah,
You got it.
My second book had come out, and I called up or sent an email. By then, email it's 2005 or so, and I sent an email to the Today Show with a story idea that revolved or related to my book, my second book on men and relationships. And they got back to me and they said, "Whoa, this is a great idea." I'm like, "What?" "Yeah, this is a great idea. We like it. Could we pay you $500 and then you not do it?" And I went, "Ooh, no, you can't pay me $500 and me not do it." "Well, we just like the idea. We get somebody else to talk about it." I said, No, I don't do that.
Wow.
So then they said, "All right, we'll have you on. We'll have somebody else on." They had somebody else on whose name was Neil. And Matt Lauer knew him very well. And as we sat down, Matt Lauer proceeded to have a conversation with Neil, his buddy.
Right.
And that's what happened. So Matt was not a bad guy. He just forgot that I was there because he had been working with this, and apparently they had talked with him about how this guy gave us the idea he has to be there. I think they gave me one question that I stumbled on a little bit and then got pissed afterwards.
Yeah.
But that's my Matt Lauer story.
Well, at least he didn't expose himself to you or anything.
No, he didn't, he didn't ask me to come back to his hotel.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Well, do you think the producers had it in mind to get somebody else named Neil?
No.
I mean, so that wasn't purposeful.
No,
it
they
wasn't
had
like-
somebody who is sort of their doctor of psychology.
Oh,
And because
so-
I was a journalist who discovered and came up with the idea and also had written a book about it and I thought I could be expert.
Mhm.
And I was actually expert on the topic. But because I didn't have the credentials and had just spent 4 or 5 years writing a book rather than getting a PhD, they wanted to have a PhD saying the words. So they wanted my information to be in the mouth of somebody else because that's the way they felt they could best convey that information. I'm giving them the benefit of the doubt. Or they have these guys that are sort of practiced, and so it was like their psychologist who then would learn from me and then answer their questions.
Yeah, just to
rather
lend
than-
credence to the story
Yeah.
in their eyes.
In their
anyway.
eyes, but if
Yeah.
it had PhD at the end. They asked me, "Are you a PhD? No. Are you a doctor? No. What are you?" "Well, I'm a journalist." "Okay. We can't really, we can't have you I'll tell them what's in my story. I'll tell them what's in my book and how I found it." No.
You need some kind of authoritative.
It's amazing.
They needed someone who they thought was authoritative, which is the way our culture works. You get numbers and letters, and that credentials you to get the next thing. And
Well, what's amazing to me today is nowadays you can ship off for a PhD. I mean, you can mail order a PhD, working on it, minimal, in a minimal way, and then okay, I've got the letters after my name, but then you can have even PhDs who have studied for many years, but they don't necessarily have a lot of expertise on one niche topic.
Right.
Yeah.
Or they do, and it's not that
Yeah.
topic.
Right. Yeah. So that's.
If you had told
But
me you were a PhD, I doubt they would have done the homework to find out whether or not that was true, to be honest.
Right. But if they had, then I probably
Yeah, you'd
would have
be in
been.
trouble.
I would have been in trouble for the rest of my life, and nothing I ever printed would ever be published again. So I tried to stay above board with them.
Yeah.
But that's kind of what.
That's
happens.
amazing that played out that way.
Yeah.
I'm sure it does all the time though with people.
I had a really good experience on Good Morning America with Charlie Gibson, if you remember him. He was a journalist an actual journalist who had kind of become, he was sort of affable, so he sort of fell into that sort of, and he had a lot of really good questions, and he also, when he sat down at the beginning of the interview, he said, let me tell you what I'm going to ask first.
Oh, so
And when it was your
primed
first
you a
shot
little
on
bit.
national
That's great.
television, he said, I'm just going to start by asking you bloop. And then that just took away the
Yeah,
fear.
that's excellent.
Whereas the other guy was like talking, chatting, and then as soon as it starts, it's like boom. Matt Lauer was just a different world. So I learned that there are good people in every place I've been. I've covered politics at close to the highest levels. There are just really good people, but you got to dig them out.
Yeah.
You got
Right.
you gotta
Just
find
like
them.
anything,
Yeah.
anywhere,
If you're looking
any
for-
people.
If you're looking for friends, you got to dig them out too.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I wanted to get back to the men's work just to finish that thought. So the story that I was given, just kind of picking up where we left off, MKP was put together in '85, and there were three guys. There was Bill Kauf, who was
Yes.
a psychotherapist, right?
Yes,
And then Ron Herring, who I
Yeah.
believe has passed on,
yes,
and then Rich Tosi.
yes.
And and the story that I got was that basically they would just meet on weekends after working all week and just say, look, we're going to go out with the guys and do a lot of crazy stuff, and all of these processes that came out of that was what slowly developed into what we now know as the men's weekend.
Yeah,
And in those days, apparently, it was more initiation in the sense of dark initiation, in terms of like some people, it was a little rougher, is what I'm trying to say,
I
right?
think that's probably true at the very, well, I don't really know.
Right, and I don't
I have-
either, but that's just what, over the years, just from doing the weekend myself and then staffing a bunch of weekends,
Yeah.
I've heard guys who were around in the early days say that.
I think that history, there might have been a fourth, fifth, sixth guy. I think it was Bill Kauf who wrote a book called In the Circle of Men.
Circle men, right,
Right.
yeah.
Then also Rich Tosi, he and his wife, who was very involved in women's work, did a lot of, and both of them being, all of them trained in, I think, in psychology or some level of social work or processing. But then they had to make it up at a certain point, which,
Right.
And they did during those times, and I think what a big part of this men's work is, it's psychodrama. You take what's going on inside, you put it on the carpet, and you take it apart and you figure it out a little bit and put it back together, and hopefully you're a little bit better back together.
Right,
on the
somehow,
other end of it.
yeah, reintegrate it in
Exactly.
a way that makes more sense for what you're trying to get out of life.
Done more,
And
done more in a group setting than one-on-one with a therapist or something like that.
have you been through the weekend?
No,
Yeah.
I have, I guess, some knowledge. I know some of it's kind of, kept on the back burner until you're actually involved, but,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm familiar with the general
The
concept.
day-to-day, I mean, the minute-to-minute, hour-to-hour part of it. But the thing that I would say, the big shift for me was
Realizing I had a big block in my life that came from the grief of my brother becoming mentally ill at the age of about 18 or 19 while he was in college, and I was a year behind him. So he was a junior in college and I was a sophomore in a different college. And then he had a mental breakdown and he never recovered from it. He went to Brandeis University, one of the best small colleges in the country, was a runner on their track team.
Now, is this a schizophrenic break?
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
schizophrenia is, I've learned, a combination of symptoms.
Something along those lines.
Yeah.
The traditional,
Yeah.
the break happens somewhere in the 20s,
Exactly.
usually. That, yeah.
18 to 23 or 4, when there's a lot of chemical changes going on in your own body. Also, you trying a lot of chemicals from the outside world. And he ended up in college having suicidal, tried to commit suicide through the use of pills, ended up in the hospital, and when he kind of came out of that, he never really came back. It was really an amazing moment when I saw him for the first time like 4 or 5 months later after he had been hospitalized for a while, and I heard my brother, who had been normal, annoying until that point, I heard him say, "Oh yeah, the CIA is coming." And I smiled and I went, "Yeah, right, CIA is coming." And then as I learned over time, he did believe the CIA was coming, and for the next 35 years, the CIA was coming.
Yeah.
So,
So it's like beautiful mind
yeah.
type situation.
Yeah. And he never regained that. So at a certain point in my mid-30s, 15 years later, I'm like, all right, stunted, not really heading in the right direction. What guilt, I was aware of the guilt of my brother, like, hey, he has pretty much nothing now. He's living this life. And I'm surpassing, I've got a career, I'm marrying, gonna have a kid. So now I'm at that point where, why is this okay? So I felt that, plus whenever I thought about my brother, he was like the most annoying, frustrating. We fought like brothers fight.
Yeah.
And yet I took that on also as guilt. So I had, anger, guilt, shame for being the person who survived it. What is it? I mean, it could have hit me, could have hit him, could have hit my younger brother, who was 3 years younger and a runner, and liked him.
Yeah.
I didn't even like my older brother, and I still worried that I was going to become, ill or whatever. So all that together, I had to do something with that, and the weekend gave me the space, the time, and the guidance to take all that apart, to deal with every last piece of it, and to come out of it a different person, wholer, and now just sort of shedding the many bad habits that came out of that 15 years, not to mention 19 years before that, of just being a normal fucked up human being. So,
well, not having any
yeah.
sibs, it's hard for me to relate to that relationship.
Yeah.
He has an older and a younger brother, and so
you can relate.
Yeah.
Yeah, you love and you hate.
Yeah.
All there.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we literally fought the last time we talked. I mean, physically fought the last time we actually were in the same room, my brother and I.
Mhm.
And then I heard he got sick. And so, in other words, the sort of guilt of just, I was like, man, you are so fucked up, man. You don't know what you're doing. You're an asshole. And then it's like 3 weeks later, he tried to commit suicide. I don't, and even in the moment, didn't think, oh my God, I just killed my brother.
Right.
But I thought, wow, that's like, it could have been the last time I talked to him.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, after that, I began to know and learn, and by the time he died, which was in his 50s, I had come to care for him. But I had to let him go in a brother sense. He was not my brother anymore in any of the ways that I wanted him to be, which is what was ripping me apart in my 30s.
Now, was his decline due mainly to his mental illness?
Yeah, he became ill at a time where they were pretty unsure what to give, so they gave a lot and they gave different things, and eventually they got to a place where they were able to give him medication. All the way through that time, he was smoking 2 to 3 packs a day. He was not eating that well because he was not nutritionally focused, and he just basically wore his body out. He had lithium, it's not overdose, but saturation that can happen.
Wow.
Yeah, where enough has built up, and there's like a normal procedure to undo it, where they put you out for 2 or 3 days and they take it out of your system, and then they begin to updo you again. But they can't do it while you're awake because it would have too much of an effect Well, one of those times when they took him down, he did not come back out of that.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
So it wasn't completely surprising because it was as if he was aging like like a 70 or 80-year-old
Mhm.
when he was in his 50s.
You mean the decline
The
was just
decline
like
was
that
precipitous.
swift? Wow.
Like in the
Yeah.
last 5 years of his life, he looked to me like someone going from 50 to 70. Yeah.
Well, in your books, and I want to get to this later quite a bit, but there seems to be a real poignancy about the last words you have with a loved one.
Mhm.
I mean, here it's your brother you're talking about, but with
Yeah.
fathers as well. And to me,
Yeah.
the statistics were staggering on how men cope with the loss.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a
Differently.
huge factor, isn't it? Like
Yeah.
when you, like what happened? What was the last thing?
Yeah. The last thing's important, but more important is sort of the last time period. So, yes, if the last thing, and there's a story in there of Mahatma Gandhi, I think, who
Right,
was
yeah, I remember
like
that.
having sex, not paying attention to his father because he was like, I'm going to leave him and go and
He
like,
wanted to get upstairs to his
Yeah,
bride.
right.
Right, yeah.
and so he was feeling terribly guilty for the rest of his life.
Mhm.
And, but more, if you have never resolved with your father and you are, say, in your 30s, 40s, 50s, often then you feel bad about it after, and it makes the relationship linger on longer because you feel like you should have done something. By the time you got to be 30, 40, 50, there's where you feel like, well, maybe just being the adult here and reaching out. And then if they say, hey, I'm not interested in you, whatever fathers do,
Yeah.
then, you have at least tried.
Yeah, so
You
you've
are
been in a
the
place
adult.
where you're approaching.
You're approaching, right.
Yeah.
And so you're trying to be in an equal relationship, and now you're saying, I'm going to forgive all that stuff you did, or at least talk with you about it, or try to forgive you, or, and they may say, you got nothing to forgive, you're lucky you had me, and that happened. I got those stories all the time in my book.
Yeah.
Then there are a lot of fathers who are happy to have them. They don't know quite what to do the first couple of times when the kid says something like, I'm going to let all that other stuff go. And then he says, that means that when you beat the hell out of me that time without, okay.
But I'm ready for the relationship to shift into something new and different.
Right.
Yeah.
And when the father is trying to keep it there, or when the son is still the boy, there is a point where you have to step up, not at 17, but maybe in your 20s or 30s, where you hope once your father hasn't done that, you either, let that go or try to change the dynamic.
We actually talked about it in the last episode about one of the big factors for us starting the podcast was Jordan Peterson. I don't know if you're familiar with him or what's been going on online with him.
I don't know the name.
There's a lot
exactly,
of story
but
behind it that I won't,
Yeah.
because people can go see it if they want
Yeah.
to. But one of the things he talks about a lot is a person's feeling of intrinsic value has a lot to do with the responsibility that they assume.
Mhm.
And that sounds really like what you're saying.
Yes.
There seems to be this point where at some point the psyche has to say, oh, it's time to go in and get responsible and talk to dad or
Right. Yeah, and there's a lot of sons. In fact, this is the danger with losing a father or having no father at a young time in your life, is you can't make those connections. You can't get to the place where you are then eye to eye with an adult man that makes you move into manhood. So if you don't have any adult man, you're still sort of looking. A lot of men who are getting in their 20s without a father are like, who's my father now? Who's going to be my father figure? And they're looking around because they haven't gotten to the place where they can go, now we're equal. My dad was very good to me, even though we had struggles in childhood, because at a certain point he said, hey, I put you through college, you are making decisions, and he didn't even say, I wouldn't make them. He said, I'm really glad you're making decisions, take care of your own life. That's what I wanted. I wanted you to make them. I'm not going to judge you at all, except I'm proud of you for making decisions. So it's like, hey, I want to back out of this. And
So they like gave you the blessing to do that.
the blessing.
Yeah, right.
So that blessing has to happen at some point, and it can be really gentle blessing, just simply like that, or it can be like these things where, all right, you are now anointed the father of the,
Yeah, very ritualistic.
very
and
ritualistic,
Yeah, right.
and from then on you have a certain, they did that in the Jewish community, and I had a bar mitzvah. I come from a very odd family where my grandparents were Orthodox Jew, and my father and mother were Reformed, even anti-Jewish. So when I had a bar mitzvah,
Sure, that set up some interesting
yeah, they weren't anti-Semitic.
family dinners.
But when my grandfather would come, he made sure I got bar mitzvah, and my parents didn't even come to my bar mitzvah because to them it had no ritualistic value. My grandfather had huge ritualistic value. So
Wow.
I went and got myself bar mitzvah so I could be a man in my grandfather's eyes, even though I wasn't a man in my parents' eyes.
Or even a man.
And they were right.
Even a man in your own eyes. I mean.
I wasn't really at 13.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, so in our culture, in his culture, 13 was a manhood. And frankly, my grandfather, his father had come to America when he was a grandfather 9. So from 9 to 19, he was the man of the house. Because his father was in New York and they were back in the old country, aka Poland and Belarus.
Belarus, yeah.
Those are the countries now that they live from.
So, what's interesting to me about that, though, is that in the cultures that still hold on to whatever ritual of transformation that boys make to get to manhood,
Yeah.
let's say that a man gets to 30 years old, and he's like a lot of men in our culture presently, who might not have gotten into a whole lot of responsible stuff. He might be living in the basement, playing Xbox. Mom's upstairs wondering what's going on. When's he coming?
Are you
up?
talking about him?
No. Fortunately
No,
not.
he's definitely not that way.
I know.
But yeah, but it seems like there might be some comfort in knowing, something. I went through the ritual, and I was claimed to be a man.
Right.
And even though maybe I haven't been acting that way for the last 15 or 17 years or whatever it is, I feel okay stepping into it because I had that ritual.
Yeah.
As opposed to I'm 30 and I have no anchoring whatsoever. Nobody ever told me that I'm a man, really.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody ever showed me the way. The templates were murky. I tried to join a gang. They wouldn't have me. And so and it's
I think it's a tough call at 13, and
It's a very hard time, and I think it has been in the last 50 years, to be male in our culture because it's a moving target as to what maleness is or should be, and there is a lot of power and responsibility invested in men, and yet we don't really know how to handle it very well. That's why we cling to it.
Right, we're just
as
walking
opposed to
around.
letting we're walking around going, we're winging it. We're winging it, and we would say something like, well, women can't do that because they can't wing it as well as we can wing it. There's a lot of
that's
Trouble
ridiculous.
for saying that. Can't say that.
there's
Do what?
Can't say that.
No, I think they probably wing it better, and I think we would wing it better if we were doing it with others and letting in more of that. I guess I keep coming back to that. One of the central issues of or central tenets of my being is equality across cultures, genders. Just who would be doing the up and down part? What would be the value in that or advantage to anybody, to any of us?
It's more of like a decentralized approach to
Yeah,
human relations in general.
Yeah.
As opposed to here you be in power over there.
yeah. And understanding at some level there has to be government, but I grew up in the Nixon era, and so I'm wary of government. I also
Highly suspicious.
That's
the
I also
phrase, I think.
Yeah, I also realize that government is sometimes a well-run government, and a well-run democracy is way better than a well-run autocracy, oligarchy, or anything else that's out there. So
Right.
I'd like to do the best we can with what we have right here and try to, make it better. So I do feel very lucky on that level of being able to live in this culture. Now, if you're a woman, or particularly in recent years, I've learned more in my new work about the Black community, and there's no feeling of, wow, I'm lucky to be in America. I mean, there's some feeling of that, but there's also a big one of, wow, this place.
You mean
So
coming from
coming
the Black perspective?
the Black perspective that I
living in
see
America. Yeah.
close up.
Yeah, as best as we can understand it as
Yes.
WASPs.
Yes. Again, not being a WASP, but being. I have an interesting background that both being Jewish, born in the 50s, it's quite almost a whiff of Hitler is still in the air.
Oh.
So.
You mean in your family, or?
Well, not very far from my family. Yeah, it would be extended. Now, my family was fortunate enough to come in the 20s, but that means that had they stayed an extra decade or couldn't get over, and they were coming because Jewish people were being run out of Europe and pretty much, and Russia and all that. And the United States was like, yeah, come on in. So we were building up our resources over here, and that really made a big difference.
It's a very hard time, and I think it has been in the last 50 years, to be male in our culture, because it's a moving target as to what maleness is or should be, and there is a lot of power and responsibility invested in men, and yet we don't really know how to handle it very well. That's why we cling to it.
Right, we're just
as opposed
walking
to
around.
letting- We're walking around going, we're winging it. We're winging it, and we would say something like, well, women can't do that because they can't wing it as well as we can wing it. There's a lot of
You're in trouble for saying that. Can't say that.
Do what?
Can't say that.
No,
You're in
I think
trouble
they
for
probably
that.
wing it better, and I think we would wing it better if we were doing it with others and letting in more of that. I guess I keep coming back to that. One of the central issues of my, or central tenets of my being is the equality across cultures, genders. Just who would be doing the up and down part? What would be the value in that, or advantage to anybody, or to any of us?
It's more of like a decentralized approach to human relations in general, as opposed to here you be in power over there.
Yeah, and understanding at some level there has to be government, but I grew up in the Nixon era, and so I'm so wary of government. I also
Highly suspicious. That's the phrase, I think.
Yeah, I also realize that government is sometimes a well-run government, and a well-run democracy is way better than a well-run autocracy, oligarchy, or anything else that's out there. So I'd like to do the best we can with what we have right here and try to make it better. So I do feel very lucky on that level of being able to live in this culture. Now, if you're a woman, or particularly in recent years, I've learned more in my new work about the Black community, and there's no feeling of, wow, I'm lucky to be in America. I mean, there's some feeling of that, but there's also a big one of, wow, this place.
You mean
So
coming from the Black perspective?
The Black perspective that I
living in
see
America.
close up.
Yeah, as best as we can understand it as WASPs.
Yeah, again, not being a WASP, but being. I have an interesting background that both being Jewish, born in the 50s, it's quite almost a whiff of Hitler is still in the air.
Oh.
So.
You mean in your family, or?
Well, not very far from my family. Yeah, it would be extended. Now, my family was fortunate enough to come in the 20s, but that means that had they stayed an extra decade or couldn't get over, and they were coming because Jewish people were being run out of Europe, and pretty much, and Russia and all that. And the United States was like, yeah, come on in. So we were building up our resources over here, and that really made a big difference.
So you were talking a lot about the way all of the family talk started was with the brother.
Yeah.
You said you had gone to the weekend initially because of something you felt you were holding
Right.
concerning that whole situation, which was way out of your control.
Right.
So did you get what you?
I did.
Yeah.
Amazingly.
So what happened exactly that allowed that to?
Unblock her.
The main thing, it was the beginning of a process, but it was a very important beginning. I had spent, because I had started covering it as from a press perspective, I had actually been to a number of evenings and weekends and listened to everybody and read all the books, and I saw something really important in there, but it wasn't until I did the weekend that I actually had emotional gain. And I think what happened was that they made it possible to open up. They made it almost like safe to do work that was deeper than you can do on your own.
Oh, yeah,
And even
definitely.
deeper than you can do with one other person. You have to have, or what we did have, was a community of people who are all at that moment devoted to your success in breaking through. So I did a lot of breaking through there, and then I noted what I did and continued that work with the group.
Mm-hmm.
There's like a 10-week follow-up where everything is very intensified, continues to stay that way, and then the same group continued to meet every maybe couple of weeks to a month for those many years.
Right.
So each new issue that I sort of ran into, my son was born and was raised during that period, so that meant there was always some problem. My relationship with my wife went from 10 years to 25 years. Few things go on in there. Now we're at closer to 35 years, so it's not as rocky. And our son has left the nest, and so we've got it down to a dog and
Right.
and a couple of other moving parts. But it's
So you
pretty
mentioned
nice.
that in your book that 36 and over in marriage, that's the mature marriage. So you all are one
Did
year
I
away.
say something like
I
that?
think that's what it said. Yeah.
It
if
is
I remember.
funny because I have not read my books in many years, but
I do the same thing. I
Yeah.
Go back.
Go back.
When did I write that?
What did I say?
What happened?
But I have spent a lot of time after Fatherloss came out on the road talking about fathers and sons, of course, raising my own son. And I felt like that book in some ways was a more groundbreaking book for me in what I learned and got from it, and also in what it discovered beyond what I discovered in the other work that I did. So Fatherloss, I think, changed my understanding of grief from the beginning of starting it until ending it, the way men grieve. I
Right.
really thought that when I started, I would find out that men don't grieve very well and that women seem to grieve better. And so how can we help men grieve a little bit more like women? What I found, however, was that men grieve just as well as women. We tend toward a different style than women do, but there's even a lot of overlap in the styles. And that if we just talk with men a little bit more about grieving and what that is and what it means and that men will actually do it more effectively for themselves and not have the added burden of feeling like there's something wrong with them because they didn't cry after their father died, which is not the case. There's nothing wrong with you if you don't cry after your father died. You could ask yourself if there is a reason, and you might find that there's something wrong with you, but wrong is probably not the right word. But the idea is that, there's a lot to sort of filter through. And there's a lot of the way men do it already that just needs to be identified and actually preserved and spread out. Because men do it really well. they could use some, as a group, we could use some massaging. But as a group, women could use some massaging in the way they grieve too. They tend to be more expressive in their grief, especially with tears and words. And we tend to be more internal with our grief, thinking, and then external, but not but in something like a memorial or a book that your father left you, going and reading through that, or listening to the music that he left behind. I talked to one man who said, I'm not grieving, there's something wrong with me, and he was out in his garage, his father's garage, using his father's wood to make the urn for his father's ashes. And I'm like, that's not grieving? Did you enjoy that? Oh yeah, I loved it, it was fantastic. Did it help you? Oh man, you wouldn't believe it. People would come out, I'd tell them all about all the wood and the things that I do with my father. And then in the end, I got to put my father's in his favorite wood. I took all of his best wood and made it into, I said, to myself first, well, if that guy feels better, he goes through this, he comes out on the other end, who am I to say that he's not crying and therefore not grieving?
It's processing.
Right.
I think that's right.
And I began to see that grief is really about like a tension that we have inside of us, like I want this person alive, this person is not alive. It's a tension.
Yeah.
And whatever we do with that tension, we can sit there on it and not do anything. But if we cry, that tension somehow releases. If we go out and batter something really hard, that tension sometimes releases. If we take his vinyl and put it on our new record player. On our turntable.
On our MP3.
Yeah. And if we listen to music that he likes to listen to, it can bring all that kind of stuff back. And really, where's the end of grieving anyway? Where's the end of the grief process, except maybe at the point where you start feeling good when you think about the person?
Right.
And when you measure that, men are exactly where women are.
See, and what's interesting to me is how it's become almost cliche in a lot of films that deal with, the father dies or something, and like rom-coms, where, you've got this couple together and something happens, where, you'll have the wife or the girlfriend get together with girlfriends and say, well, he just can't let it go, or he just can't express, and if only he could, and then maybe you'll have a magic moment in the movie where he cries. It's like, he's finally doing it, and it's like yeah, he's doing it in the way that you see fit, in the way that you would do it.
And here's the weird thing: is that she's inside going,
ew, he doesn't look too good when he cries.
Right.
I wish he wasn't crying.
Right. Yeah.
So I wish he wasn't so
sensitive. Where am I as a
sensitive.
woman if he's crying, which is emblematic of me being a woman? And
I almost feel like that. Them wanting that reaction out of you is more cathartic for them than it is for you.
Right.
Very true.
Yeah.
In fact, in the book, there's a chapter for women, and what I say is, don't invade their space. You can touch them on the shoulder; they're gonna be okay with that. But if you start saying, I don't see you quite getting the,
Right.
no. You could go as far as to say, I'll talk with you and not say anything. But even that implies you're not talking. Well, men don't have to talk, nor do women. I used to give a talk about how men grieve, and then these women would come up and go, uh-oh, I grieve like a man. Because there's a big, a lot of women don't want to be bawling in front of their girlfriends or their boyfriend. They go into a place where they're alone, and a few men will bawl anytime. I do notice that as men get older, they're more quick to be have emotional tears, but not to have necessarily tears out of grief. It's more like tears of joy when they have their grandchild or they see, but not so much. Only 30% of men whose fathers died after the men were over 55 even cried over their father's death. It was as if, my dad's 87, I'm 61. I probably will cry because I've just now more recently become more emotional at times. But it won't be because, oh my God, I've lost this person who's essential to my life.
Right.
Because he's not essential to my living the rest of my life anymore. It's almost like what I had, I'm crying over. But I've been letting that go for a long time.
Yeah, like you've been secretly or internally
Exactly.
in a process.
They call
the whole time.
they call it anticipatory grief.
Right, yeah. So it's like it's building up, and something
My
that
father's decline. You know, you see your dad when he was 6'2" and, you know, broad-shouldered, and now you see him at, you know.
yeah. It's like
You
like
had-
the king is
right.
gone.
And he needs your arm to walk down the street.
Yeah.
It's
right.
a different world.
Well, and I think too that as we get older as men, we have learned through film and perhaps even through other really good men that we've watched or patterned ourselves after.
Yeah.
Oh, this is how to respond to this when this happens.
Yeah.
And if you've maybe been around women more and you've gotten the information that, well, you know, you really need to be crying about this,
Right.
you know, then,
Right.
you know, you say, okay, well, this is what I must do. In order to be part of the tribe,
Yeah. They're the
I did-
emotional experts, those women are.
yeah.
And we're going, now, what are we supposed to do?
Yeah, right.
And then it's
Tell me
like-
that again.
Yeah,
What was that?
cry.
Tell me how to
I
breathe.
can't do it. I can't
Yeah,
make
right.
myself. I'm
Yeah.
not an actor.
Yeah. When you see that in the work too, right? You know, you'll be in there with the guys and you'll see some guy over there going, you know, just trying
Just
to
trying.
you know, he's like really trying to pump it out. Why didn't it come out? You know, and it's like,
Right.
it's like, well, you know, it's not what it is.
Do you think there's any connection between that and, I noticed or have noticed a lot of women seem to want to fix things in people, you know, fix you emotionally or fix your bad habits or fix something
Yes.
on a personal level, you know, not the way that we go fix, you know, a toilet or something, but they want to fix other people.
They want to fix. I think there's a tendency for women to be taught to train us. Like, oh, okay,
All right.
we've got the wild man now. Let's draw him in and domesticate
Yeah.
him.
And now he's domesticated and he's
Right.
tamed, and now I'm bored.
Yeah, exactly. So I was lucky, actually, and part of it was I did not want to have that, so I had to let that go. That was the hard part, is the not hanging on when my wife, even at a party, might want to go and be loud, different, crazy, weird. I don't want to go, honey.
So you're the one saying, chill that out over there.
No, I don't. That's it. I don't. Because I don't want her to rein me in on anything else.
Oh, I see.
Like I can be jumping, that's not my thing. So you're not going to have to rein me in on that. But maybe you're going to have to rein me in on some other passion that I have. So she and I both said right from the beginning, let's not rein in each other's passions. Because, you know, you get in the way of anybody else who really wants to do something or who's really letting out their inner self.
Mm-hmm.
I think that deteriorates the relationship.
Yeah, because there's going to be some kind of harbored resentment going on
Yes.
that's probably unspoken, probably unconscious,
Right.
but it'll come out sideways
Right,
in some
right.
weird way.
Yeah.
Right. I agree.
It's like I've been a manager only now for 8 years. I was a writer, and then I suddenly started working at the Carnegie Center. And even with my staff, I'm tend to like, ooh, man, I want to say, do this more. I want to say, get off of it.
Right.
Get off of it. I want to say, and I say none of it. I think they will tell you that I do not rein in anywhere, except I guess if somebody was wanting to spend money that we don't have, you know, I'll say, okay,
Yeah,
we
so
don't have
something
the money.
really big
But
time.
as far as like idea, I'm not a no person. I might be, let's find a way to yes. You know, so it's like whatever I can do to not say no as a manager. And the only thing that I can judge my success on is that I'm keeping incredibly good people. But I'm not controlling them
Right.
because they're really good people are not controllable. So, you know, occasionally I have to say, God, man, we can't do that. But I'm negotiating with them.
Yeah.
They're equal human beings. I used to be a union president.
Oh.
They don't know that. But
So you've got some advantages.
I know both sides, and you know, I'm at the place. But the thing I know about the other side is that if you want good employees, I mean, if you nickel and dime employees, they'll kill you.
Right.
They'll nickel and dime you. They'll $1 and $10 you.
And you've wasted
So
your whole day just
don't try to
covering
nickel
it
and dime
or
an
whatever.
employee. Hire good employees who really care and who do their job well, and then get out of the way. If you try to control it. Hey, same thing. Marry a really good woman.
Yeah, it's in the casting.
Get the hell
It's the
out of
casting.
the way.
Yeah, that's right.
It's in the casting.
Yeah, that's right. I think Woody Allen used to say that. It's like 99% of it's casting.
I think he's right, although I don't consider him an expert on all things.
Right. Yeah. He wouldn't. Yeah, he wouldn't.
Right. I wouldn't think he's an
Right. Yeah.
crazy stuff.
Oh yeah, it's funny stuff. It's good.
So how did you get yourself into that mess of men's work?
I was way more unconscious than you were about. Way.
Okay. Who dragged you in?
It was Fogler, Michael Fogler.
Yeah, good.
I play guitar, and I think Michael is still teaching classical guitar. He may have stopped
I think
that.
he stopped that.
But he was for many, many years.
Yes.
He was
My
just
son taught.
unreal classical guitarist. He was
Yeah.
great. And I was wanting to play a lot of flamenco at the time. I was
Yeah.
doing a lot of flamenco dance.
Okay.
And so I went to him and we studied, and I'd maybe been with him for about a year or so. I think he was kind of feeling me out. And then he said, "Hey, well, you really ought to consider going on this men's weekend." And I said, "Well, what is it? We're going to be hanging out, throwing back beers or something, And he was like, "No, it's not exactly like that, So it wasn't
Oh,
going to be
man.
the Club Med experience."
Michael.
And so,
Mike was like, not exactly like
Yeah,
that.
not
You got
exactly.
issues you want to work on.
right,
in your life?
yeah. You have
I'm
issues you
gonna
don't know
issues.
about. Yeah.
You didn't have any, did you?
No, I
You didn't
think
think
we all do. I think
Of
we all
course
do.
we all do.
And I had them, but I don't think that I had any kind of vocabulary for
That was a big thing.
those things. I didn't even know that they were part of the operating system that was making me have behaviors I was having that had pretty much wrecked my first marriage in a lot of ways. I mean, there are so many ways to wreck a marriage, and
50 ways to wreck a
and I mean, for me, it never was anything like infidelity, but it was just not being able to relate or deal.
Yeah.
And so when I got on the weekend, it was mysterious to me the first day or two, and then the third day.
What about
as
when
you
they
know,
sat you down, though, the first day? Oh, I don't know how much we
The-
can
the-
talk
the-
about, but when they sat you
Yeah,
down.
yeah. I don't want to talk
the
about it
first
too
day,
much, just because just to be good about it. But
Just the way
it was.
they-
I'll just say that as a whole, I went there feeling very mysterious and what is this, and throughout that, I just felt like the image is always the acorn that's cracked open in the forest. That. And then by the end of it, I was so elated. Something, when they talk about in the Bible, like spirits leaving the body, and not to wax too poetic, but that really was the feeling of it. And then I learned as I went along that you have to be really careful with that, because you can get into this period of elation, and then all of a sudden you're seeing everything new and you're wanting more and more and more and more. And then as that tapers off and you kind of, it's kind of like you were here,
Yeah.
and then you do something like the weekend. It doesn't have to be the weekend,
Right.
but something like the weekend that is so absolutely transformative.
Yeah.
And then boom, and then it's like, okay, back to my life, but you're a little further up.
Yes.
And then if you maintain that over time, the other thing I found out is you have to be really careful. I don't think the soul can handle too much consciousness all at once. And I watched that as I got into the work more, and I staffed weekends, and I got on the leader body and stuff.
Yeah.
I watched that, and you just see these guys get really conscious about their lives, and sometimes it was to the point of, I can't deal with the reality of this. Like, my ego has wrapped around something to protect me from the horrors of my life, and now you crack me wide open. And so I think you have to be really careful with who goes on the weekend. I mean, I think, it's like the men have to be in this certain place to go and to experience
Not
that.
like you, which is like, hey, just pull him off the street and see if he wants to go.
But you know, there are plenty of guys that are just
I think it is.
suffering and you know, like Ernie Perry, you mentioned Ernie.
Yeah.
He used to say that there are guys who are desperately in need of the weekend, and they probably would crash and burn if they didn't have it. And then there are guys who are tremendous at helping other guys to go through the process. And then there are guys who are already on their spiritual walk, and you just say, hey, well, come on and jump in and do
Yeah.
it. And so you have these different flavors of guys that come on. But I think it is a mistake. It has been sort of shown to be a mistake to have guys that are way too fragile. They're in a state that's so fragile they can't
deal with it.
I think my brother, in that sense, was in a very fragile place in college, which is where you are in a fragile place, and your future is unknown. And you know, again, you can go into a spiritual state through drug use or any other combination that is so real. You know, he's a junior. You're starting to like, oh my God, I have to like get real jobs, or I have to start making big decisions. And usually we kind of cram that down, and then sometime in our lives we have an awakening or a series of awakenings. And I probably had 3 or 4, but by the time I was 40. And,
Right.
And then they slowed down a little bit after that.
Well, and they all speak to you in different ways. I mean, another thing with the work that spoke to me was I had already been into Joseph Campbell, like super big. And so a lot of the mythopoetic stuff really spoke to me, the Robert Bly stuff. And but there were other experiences that I had that were, for other people, they were like really a big deal. And I just didn't really, it didn't click for me. So,
Very
I don't
different.
know, man, every path is just so different.
Absolutely.
You know, and you have to respect it. And, you know, you have to love people enough to say, you know, well, this is here. If you want to look into it, here's a website or whatever, you know, but if it's not for you, I'm not offended. I don't care. You know?
Yeah, and I always struggled with the, what would you call it, proselytizing that we was encouraged of us, and proselytizing really in a somewhat harmless way, but nonetheless, it was like, you know, find your brothers, get them, you're saving them, all that kind of stuff, which sounded a little bit like, oh my God, saving, we're going out and saving people? No.
Right.
So I was pretty bad about recruiting others. I felt like people almost like, I mean, letting them know of it, or if they brought something up, I would certainly do, but I wouldn't recruit or be out there trying to.
Yeah, if it comes up organically in a conversation, you know, without a big agenda going on, that's great. But and that's just like anything. I mean, you can have somebody that's part of a cult, or you know, in a church that says, you know, go out there and get more members. You know,
Right, that kind of thing. That would, but
but
the weekend itself was the best experiential growth that I had, and then having it follow up with the weekly or every other week, I can't remember, and then, you know, being able to continue it on and have this stable group of men in my life for midlife was really a nice bonus.
But I did want to ask you, because you had said something there early on about when you were covering in the Bay Area a lot of the spiritual that area, and you were talking about Robert Bly starting out as a feminist and then going to more of men's issues. There's
been this thing recently, and it's in some of the more recent videos with Peterson and some other people, about this Jungian idea of whatever is highly expressed culturally or individually, the opposite will be secretly yearned for. Do you feel like that was at play there? Like we had this whole thing of Betty Friedan and feminism, and it was so strong, and then all of a sudden the men's movement really starts cranking in, and you know what I mean?
I do know I know what you were saying up to that point, but I'm not sure.
I do, with just enough knowledge to be dangerous, feel that Jung makes a lot of sense, and that is, by making a lot of sense, I mean I've experienced mostly through dream work his brilliance in terms of what's happening and intrapersonally, what's happening within one's own psyche. And I find that he makes a lot of sense. Now, and yes, when we express this, I totally believe that when I get irritated by somebody and I say that person is an egotist, that the biggest learning for me is to say, I'm an egotist. What did I just mean?
Spot it, you got it.
Exactly.
Right, yeah.
So that, to me, projection is a great, easy way to learn. And as soon as you can touch in with, oh, that person sparks me, that person makes me this, that's because I've got it. That was wonderful learning in our men's group. We used to always be, hey, spotting it and going, wow, why am I reacting so hard?
And going back to self-responsibility.
And then you'd figure out, why was I reacting so hard? And then when you got to that place where you learned why you were, it kind of dissolves. That's, I think, how the learning goes, or how the growth goes. So by getting in on a weekend where I could take, and when you were talking about vocabulary, I think that was a big piece of it, is that I was able to see, oh, I have 5 major emotions. Boom, 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 boom.
Mm-hmm.
Let me see how I definitely had that with my brother. Definitely have that with my brother. Definitely have that. And I realized that I had love, I had, well, what are they?
The whole bag.
Mad, sad, glad, ashamed. And
yeah, I think shame, by some people, is thought of as a mixture of the other, and some of the other.
I had them all.
But
And when I took them apart, I pulled them out and then was able to address each one. They clarified and more or less dissolved. Now, again, it wasn't the next day. It was sort of, my behaviors would still follow.
Right. Yeah,
Then I'd be like,
overnight.
why did I do that? I didn't just quit being an asshole most of the, but maybe over time, I stopped being as much of an asshole. Mm-hmm. So that kind of thing happened over time.
And it was through the awareness of it and developing a language that
and probably also there's the self-forgiveness. That's a big thing, especially I think for men. Maybe we act like we don't have to forgive ourselves for anything.
Yeah, John Wayne.
Yeah, so we'll just be like, well, I killed somebody, but what the heck.
Yeah.
So, but you might have to go back and go, wait a minute, when I was there in Vietnam even, I shot that person. I have to reckon with what that means. I can't just say, hey, we were the good guys, or they told me I had to do it, so I did my job. And you could maybe get away with that, but probably not.
Right.
So where, how, and when do you get down to that, and how does that affect your life and not affect your life? Mm-hmm. And then all of us have that. I didn't go to war. I just grew up in my family, and my brother got sick. Mm-hmm. And I had dreams that I had that didn't pan out. So how do you deal with those kind of questions? And I feel like at 60 something now, the fires have come down, but they're still burning hard. They're just not like way up here, burning out of control. They're just kind of
probably more manageable.
Much more manageable.
Yeah. Isn't that great?
It is great. Aging. Put that on your list of things to do.
In case you weren't thinking about it.
In case you weren't thinking about that. Turning 60. No, I would say that each generation or each time period that I'm in, I was thinking about this the other day, is that I do like the thing for your age. When people say, hey, you look pretty good for your age, or hey, you look at that. I feel right now in my life the best I felt for my age. So when I was 20, I didn't feel that good about myself, body, mind, whatever. 30, yeah, sure, I was healthier, and I was getting a little more getting my shit together, and I was getting married and having a kid and getting into the men's work. My 40s, but now that I'm in my 60s, I feel like I'm where I should be in my life, and looking back on all of that, saying, hey, that was a really hard time, but I'm glad I went through it. Writing that, having a tough time with the books, glad I did that. So you kind of realize that there's an accumulation going on, and my grandfather used to say, there's a review board. He didn't believe in God, so he said it was kind of a review board that you go through at the end of your life.
Yeah.
Click, let's see, were you a nice person?
Yeah.
Bad,
So it's like an internal bucket list.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, I got to be nice at
They're
some
doing
point.
a little thing at the Saint, even us Jews look and say, Saint Peter, yeah, he's at the Golden Gates.
Yeah.
The Golden Gates.
St. Peter, what do you want? What do you?
Right. Peter.
Yeah. Yeah. Peter, he's a slippery guy. I tell you.
How many generations since your coming to the United States? Your family?
Well, my mom has German heritage.
And that would have been her mother's mother.
Okay.
Okay.
So you're about a grandparent away from having come to.
Yeah.
Great-grandparent.
Yeah,
Well, and then, but granddad was,
I know on
they've been here.
the first side of things, it's been here, I know they've, since what, Revolution.
So you had some of your
Yeah.
families here since, and even in Kentucky.
Yeah, my parents have been here a long time, in particular here in Lexington. Yeah, my uncle Caesar was actually
Caesar or Sebastian?
yeah, Caesar. Well,
Yeah, on the other side?
Caesar Hurst.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, actually, the Hearst, they actually we had the other cemetery here in town, not the Lexington Cemetery, and then a lot of other land and things like that. But Caesar Hearst was a very famous lawyer, and so and in the Kentucky region, he came from that. He was the one who raised my dad because his folks had divorced. Now his dad was a little more of an immigrant.
Yeah, first
Fast.
generation, came to the States when he was 4 from Germany.
As a matter of fact, your granddad, Dieter's dad, didn't even speak English very much. did he?
Yeah,
Maybe a little bit.
some. He came when he was, I think, in his mid-30s. Yeah.
That's tough. Immigrate at that age.
Yeah. And did he have like a clothing or
Yeah, he
textile
was
thing?
a tailor by trade.
Kind of,
Yeah,
yeah.
and came here during the war and, applied his trade here in various factories and things of that nature.
Yeah. That's awesome.
It's new.
Gang, just so you know, we have with us Neil Chethik, and all of the talk he's been doing about fatherhood and father loss and the grieving of men and how men deal with things is detailed in his first book, Fatherloss, and it's available at fine bookstores everywhere. So he does know whereof he speaks. We're not just talking just for the health of it. We're going to take a quick break, and we are going to have a nice little poetry reading of, speaking of Robert Bly, Snowbanks, which is one of his very famous poems, which was very famously included in the
Those
Rag and Bone Shop of the Heart. What's it?
Those great sweeps.
Those great sweeps of snow that stop
Stop
6 feet from the house.
6 feet from the
Yeah,
house.
it's a great poem. So anyway, we're going to cut away to that, and we'll be back in just a moment.
Those great sweeps of snow that stop 6 feet from the house. Thoughts that go so far. The boy gets out of high school and reads no more books. The son stops calling home. The mother puts down her rolling pin and makes no more bread, and the wife looks at her husband one night at a party and loves him no more. The energy leaves the wine, and the minister falls, leaving the church. It will not come closer. The one inside moves back, and the hands touch nothing and are safe. The father grieves for his son and will not leave the room where the coffin stands. He turns away from his wife, and she sleeps alone. And the sea lifts and falls all night. The moon goes on through the unattached heavens alone. The toe of the shoe pivots in the dust, and the man in the black coat turns and goes back down the hill. No one knows why he came, or why he turned away and did not climb the hill.
And we're back.
I think it's sort of tragic how much time we have to spend in the employ of others and doing what other people want us to do. And I would say that I had, because maybe of my childhood where my mother was constantly telling us, me and my brothers, and she had 4, so you're kind of going, do this, do that.
Yeah.
Getting free of that was one of the great moments in my life. Just going to college where I still had to be places, but at least I could control when I came, when, everything, and I still feel that tug to freedom. When I went and became a journalist and started working in newspapers, even there you have a lot of freedom, but you still have to work every day.
Right.
And, so after about 4 years of that, I was like, I want to have my own time. I want to be able to do whatever I want, whenever I want. So after maybe 5, 6 years, I quit. And of course, I made no money. And 6 months later, I had to go back and get another job. But for that 6 months, I got to do whatever I wanted to do. It was transformative. Among other things, I read like I'd never read before. Books that I had kind of started, but they were classics and they were boring and whatever. Plowed through them. And then I started to like them.
Right.
And I started reading one after the next, and I saw that they were deep and interesting and had great characters, and I became actually interested in literature in that 6 months. Went back into the newspaper business just so I could figure out how to make a living on the other end of that. And it was just all I could do to 5 years later to crawl out of that business. And since then, I've never worked for anybody else. Now,
Isn't that great?
I'm a executive director, so I have a board of directors, but nobody says, Neil, come in at 9 o'clock. I did spend 20 years as a freelance writer, and that was truly no board of directors, nobody else. When I thought about maybe I'll incorporate, I was like, oh my God, I'll have other people who have me in their sights.
Yeah.
I was like, no. So it was like this point where I just had to get out of the corporatization cycle and the selling of your time and energy, and it got down to the spiritual level of selling your life force.
Well, that's what you're doing, yeah.
So will I give away the very time and passions that I have for money? Yes, I will if I have to. But if I can live cheaper, have a partner who works too, live lower, make decisions that are based on that freedom, I'll do it. And that's probably the best decision I ever made. Just got out of there.
I hear you, man.
But I wanted to be I wanted to be the New York Times, best reporter ever. That didn't happen. I had to get out of it. I could have still gone on that trip. I wasn't off of it, but I was like, do I want to do that anymore? Knowing the road ahead. It was definitely a road I could have taken, but there was, the maturity came at the point where I went, but everything I'm going to do to get to that point is not going to be worth it.
Yeah, it's the sacrifice worth the payoff.
Right.
And it wasn't anymore. I said, I'm just going to really live a life. Some of it was that I started to cover the spiritual stuff, and I was like, man, there's another dimension here. Even though it's not God like I used to think of it, which I rejected, the God in the sky that would judge me.
The bearded one.
The bearded one. And put me in hell for eternity if I was a bad person. And if I wasn't saved, I could be a good person. But if I didn't come to Jesus at some point, I'd go to the devil. And I was like, what?
5 years old.
Well, you know,
What?
you had to be extra confused because the Jewish concept of hell is a little different than the Christian one, isn't it?
Yeah,
So it's
completely confusing with my grandfather.
It's like, which hell am I going to?
Well, there is no hell.
Right. Isn't it like a
But then who do I believe? Do I believe my grandfather who says there's no hell, but this is Jewish? And then do I believe my parents who says there's nothing at all? Or do I believe the Christian down the street that says you're either going to heaven or to hell? And I'm like, I don't get any of this stuff.
Right.
I do remember though that my mother told me, she said, your brother was having an argument with this girl down the street and he was saying there is no God. And she was saying there is a God. There is no God, there is a God. And I was like, they asked me finally, and I went, wow. There is no God now, but maybe there'll be one later. And that was the truth for me.
Mm-hmm.
There wasn't one then. I didn't know what it was at all.
Well,
But there is one now that isn't named God.
and
to
all
me.
the talk about it's just mind stuff anyway. It's more labeling, so, who knows what's going
I
on
do believe
internally.
in the essential Jewish idea that we don't know. And so we better make this heaven on earth. We may make our heaven here because who knows
Right.
what's happening next.
Yeah, and despite what you profess, it's always going to be back to that, isn't it?
because there's going to be this finite world, finite life, finite time,
That's what we're all
and it's
trying
like,
to deal
okay, I'm
with.
trying to figure out how to maximize this and
Yeah.
do the best I can.
Yeah. But I
And-
don't like the one where they go, well, remember, your reward is in the next one. So work and slave and hard and this
Well,
and do, and then your reward will be in the next one.
Seems a
mean,
little disingenuous.
That was the one,
Right.
they're kind of like taking the money while you're doing that too.
Sure,
They're
yeah.
like, yeah, your reward's in the next one.
Well, in my thing, I mean, even going back to growing up in a very strict Baptist church, which is my upbringing, even from very young, I was always saying, well, how do you know that? How do you know that, And, it says it here, right?
Yeah.
And,
then it becomes a
and by the way,
tautology.
I am a believer, but not in that sense.
Right.
Right? I mean, there's so many different shades of this stuff. And that's the problem, you can walk into a room and go, well, I don't believe, and everybody's going, atheist, and then, you know what I mean?
The subtle.
And because it takes time over a
Yeah.
few cups of coffee to actually, let me find out what you really believe, and not just,
It's that
And it's
label,
ironic
label,
that
label.
It's ironic that you bring up coffee because I remember having a conversation with a guy who was a Mormon and he had changed over to Mormon because his wife is Mormon. He goes, I still don't get the Mormon church. They tell you don't have coffee and you don't have this and you don't have that and you don't have that. What do you do in between all those times?
Right.
And I was like, I don't think you get religion.
Right.
So it's just a list of don't do these things, don't
Right,
have
right.
coffee.
But it's just amazing how many different shades of it there are, and what's weird too is it's probably like the most important topic. When you really boil it down, because it's the software you're operating from, and your beliefs sort of create your behaviors and actions.
Yeah.
So it really is this huge, probably all important topic in one sense, but then in another sense, it's just so easy to gloss it and to
Or to just reject it all as a whole and then not have anything necessarily to replace it. Because you'll go,
Well, right,
yeah, my
right.
father was just very much like, this Jewish thing is like, but then when we were in California, among other things, my wife and I started attending a Unitarian Universalist church, which is not the Mooney church, but it's Unitarians who were one church, and then the Universalists were another church, and they came together and they were like politically active and they believed in universal salvation, so there was no hell. It was just come and enjoy the fruits of the greatness of our world, and the Unitarians and do good in the world. They were both involved in abolition and that kind of social justice all the way through. So my wife and I started going to one of those churches, and we ended up with a minister who was a Catholic, who had left the Catholic Church to become, and it was wonderful because he had great liturgical skills like the Catholics who know how to run but yet he did it with all this language that was inclusive of anywhere you might be. It was really like a group of seekers as opposed to a group of believers in one thing. So you had Jews who were not Jews, you had Catholics who were not Catholics. And they all came together going, I want some kind of spirituality, but we don't know exactly what it is. We all have our own.
Right.
So it worked because people brought their own and they didn't judge each other's, but they taught, as long as you didn't judge each other's, you were sort of welcomed in. So then everyone was like, okay, so you believe that and you believe that. And there was even a curriculum called Building Your Own Theology. And it made you responsible for deciding what your true theology was. And they had you read all the biblical texts. They had you pull the books that had the most influence on you throughout your life. They had you pull music and,
So probably like the most personal
it's the most personal
approach to your own
theology. Yeah, what drives me? They had you pull out your checkbook and look through it and say, that's what drives you when you had checkbooks. But look at your...
Well, I still have one.
I do too. But look at
But I haven't written a check in a long time.
look at where you spend your money.
Yeah.
So you spend it on your home. That's your theology. You want a nice friend. Not everybody spends money on their home. They might spend it only on drugs and alcohol. That's your theology.
Or you can have a really nice car but a crappy home.
Exactly. Exactly.
We see that sometimes.
Right. And so it's really with your boots on the ground on this one. It's not like what you believe in your head about, did you go to the coffee shop every day this week? Well, then you're not a Mormon. or that you care more about that, your coffee in the morning, than you care about people in the third world.
Where that money should be going, or you're
Not should. We're just saying, what do you believe?
what do you care?
Yeah, what do you care?
What do you care about?
What matters?
Yeah, and here's proof to back it up.
Right. So that was both the aspiring part of us through all the ritual, the books that we've read and, all that. And then there was the part of us that was wanting to, or, getting in the way of ourselves and not doing what we thought we would do and not doing what we would want to do. And then you develop your theology, which might be, I do care about people in third world countries more than my third cup of Java.
Right.
Then you can make that decision to do that, or you start to feel out of integrity with yourself. And we haven't even brought up that word yet, but you and I know that integrity is used so often in the men's world. The men's work that we do. It's not used in the men's world very often.
Yeah, and like so many words that are loaded.
And I consider that a loaded word. A lot of people may have different definitions for it.
Yeah. What's loaded about it?
Well, I think that if I walked down Main Street here in Lexington and pulled aside 10 people and I said, how do you define integrity? I'd probably get 10 different answers.
And what would be 2 or 3 of them that you think would come?
I think that some that are close to it, especially if you're looking at the roots of that word.
Yeah.
And they said, for me, it's something about what I say and what I do is somehow in alignment.
Yeah.
I think that probably there would be a handful of those people saying that, but then others might say, it's just about me being a good person.
Yeah.
And leaving this
Right. That is
ethereal,
true.
subjective.
You run into a sense of relativism with a lot of this stuff.
Yeah. It's a problem with language, right?
You have to have some objectivity to draw from when it comes to, your theology or whatever. You can't. You could, but for me, it comes down to, if you're going to be that relative, how do you decide what is good? How do you decide what is bad? Mm-hmm. There's got to be...
Well, assuming that's a correct barometer.
Yeah.
If you said, hey, Adolf Hitler, what do you think about what is good?
Yeah.
Right?
Like this?
Yeah. Me being in charge, that's what...
Way.
But no, I definitely would like to push back on the objectivity.
Because again, where are we with objective good and bad?
Right.
So to me, that's what the problem maybe is in some historical religion, or let's say that's what I was trying to solve in seeking a Unitarian Universalist where it's open, is that I couldn't believe this set, this set, or this set, or all this set, or all this set. Now, does that mean that I'm greater than all of them? No. But I believe that I'm involved in the creation of humanity and where we're going, not creation as in the beginning, but the ongoing creation of humanity.
Yeah.
And so I have a role in, obviously it's not a big one, I'm not going to make but if there are enough people who are in integrity and they push in a certain direction, then yes, humankind can. So I believe in the texts and the commandments and things like that, but almost like the Constitution. It's a living document. And I believe that so is spiritual evolution, not only in the individual, but in humanity. There's something going on. So I do ultimately feel that we need to trust ourselves. We need to learn and grow and read and listen and be open, but we have to be the ones who, unless we just want to take what other people have given us and said, all right, that's it, we're just going to slip it all down the road to do whatever. For example, slavery, not just slavery here, but Jews were enslaved. Lots of peoples were enslaved. It's in the Bible.
Trade is going on today.
Still on.
Yeah. So, what are we going to do about slavery? We all have come as a people away from slavery being okay, even though it's still practiced. It's not okay anymore. And so I feel like humans took that part of the evolution under its own and made decisions and said no more of this, and it reinterpreted the Bible if it had to be reinterpreted and did what
You
had to
can't
be
help
done.
but wonder, though, in a place of relativity, if you don't get back to where it's okay. You know what I mean? Like, you are so relativistic that you end up re-justifying these things, by some,
Right.
we're going to better humanity by killing half the population of the planet because
Right.
we're repopulized. I mean, how do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
You
how
end up-
do you?
Yeah, you end up on some
And that's where
shaky ground at some point.
And then there are those who feel like that would be justifiable, like
Right.
Thanos
Well,
in the Avengers.
in a,
right?
in a, in
But
a,
part of the thing that I
in
would
a
say,
relativistic world, it is justifiable. That's just it. You can get to a place where it's justifiable.
absolutely, absolutely, relatively.
Right.
No, I totally agree with you, but there's no other choice. It's like abortion. It's going to be you have to, no, that's probably not a good one to get to add to it.
Go for
But
another
no,
4 hours.
I think we're going to get a lot of comments on this show. I'll tell you that right now.
relativism is something that I believe humanity is creating anyway. No, I agree that we can get way off and say justify
Right.
and rationalize.
Right.
So the difference between rationalizing, and we have to, this is a very personal thing where you have to maintain integrity with what you do. Can this work on a societal level? I'm not sure that you can just have everyone is doing that. That doesn't feel good. I did see recently where you're supposed to pay your own, you can pay whatever fee you want with this new credit card. You go to a place you want to pull, I don't want to pay anything. I don't want to pay. But part of it is that you're supposed to pay whatever you feel is necessary. I want to get this.
Also, it's like an honor system.
It's an honor system,
Oh,
but
wow.
not really an honor system because they don't expect you to pay. But if you want to pay, you can. All the capitalists are going, what? This can't work.
Well, I don't know if it's living in the land of capitalism all my life, or if it's just I'm so used to that.
It's, that's you do have that, because immediately when you say that, I think, okay, well, that sounds more communal,
Yeah.
and perhaps leading toward socialism, to use that word, and
Right.
that's another loaded word.
Right.
But, that type of behavior where it's like, well, you put in what you can, and this person over here doesn't have as much, so that will help them.
That's the idea.
And which is a beautiful idea.
Yeah.
But the problem is, I think that we still have this real shadowy, to use that word,
Right.
for the men's work,
Right.
this shadowy section of the population who is not honorable in that way. And I think that has to be looked at and examined if we're going to set up something like that. Because every time something like that is set up, it just doesn't work.
If it's
You know-
relative, though, how can you judge them?
Well, and you're actually onto something there. I think you've got to set it up so that it does work anyway.
Problem is
Or-
where's the example?
Yeah.
I mean, they're
There are
I-
lots of them. They're all over in very small places. I mean, I would say the Carnegie Center.
Oh, well, yeah. I'm sorry. I'm thinking you're talking on the level of like, communism in countries,
Oh.
or
I'm not
full
working on
blown. Here, we'll take charge of everything.
No,
We're a very
that's-
small percentage. You all do all the work. We'll
No,
reap the
no, no,
benefits.
no.
I thought that's what you're talking about.
No, I'm
But you're talking about a decentralized approach, like earlier,
Yeah.
where there isn't this one factor going here. I'm in charge.
No.
Rather, we've all got cards, and hey, I just came into a windfall. I'll put in an extra $50 and help people out. And
Well, and
pass it
that's the
along.
way all nonprofits tend to work. Like right now in our community, the Carnegie Center, we haven't talked too much about that, but the Carnegie Center is this
I was
place where,
saving it.
where literacy and learning is going on, and people who live in Lexington go, all right, there are kids in our community who don't get a good education. They're in a school that they don't have resources, or they come from a family that's broken up and they've been going to different schools. We want to be involved in helping that child for very selfish reasons, but also from a altruistic. I
Sure.
mean, every child deserves a chance to learn, and if they don't, we know their lives are going to be negatively.
Worse for it.
Right.
Yeah.
So, we're willing to then give money without any physical return, only knowing that this will help get some of those. And if I don't give it, it will probably still happen, which is then a really hard place to go, where you're like, but then I know if I don't give it and 200 other people do the same thing I do,
Yeah.
but somehow, right now at least, enough money comes in to do the work we're going to do. Of course, if more money come in, we can do more work. So it is kind of that.
Sure.
And
There's
you
always
do-
going to be a
there's
number
always-
factor.
Yeah. But it is done, and I do have people in for-profit businesses. Often I sit with them and talk to them about, maybe donating money to the Carnegie Center or whatever, and they'll say to me, man, I don't know how you do what you do, where you don't have a product that you're selling, but you're just asking people to give you money. But you are selling a product.
Yeah,
I am selling.
Yeah, or a service. In the case of people who are holding seminars there, or
Yeah,
because
things like that.
it's much more.
For those listeners out there who may not be familiar with the Carnegie Center, please go check it out, Carnegie Center for Literacy and Learning. It's a great place that Neil is the director of, but they do a lot more than just the literacy. I mean, you all have tons. I mean, I get your
Yeah,
little
we
thing
start-
you all send out physically still, and
It's kind of hard to describe us. I'll try a couple of different ways, but one is we work with people in reading and writing from birth to death.
Reading and writing
It's good, yeah.
is where we are. We call it a cycle of literacy, in that we start with kids who are born at a local hospital, and we give each parent who has the child a book that they can begin reading immediately to their children. It turns out that in the first 2 or 3 years of life, rich families buy way more books, middle class as well, but poor kids don't get books. They don't get read to, and all the synapses that go snapping in their minds between 0 and 2 or 3, just from reading and sitting in the lap of a person you love and having this, interaction, and this looking at colors, looking at squiggly lines that eventually
Yeah, and
you
ideas
start
are
to-
kind of.
I mean, you can
like through osmosis and
you
through the
cannot
liver.
overestimate what goes on in the child's mind when they're even hearing a story, and they want to hear it again and again, and the mythologies that are
Yeah.
growing up, and then they ask questions and they learn. So if you are 3 or 4 and you haven't gotten that, and you've got a kid who's gotten all that, the difference in their ability is nothing to do with intelligence. It has all to do with the experience they've gotten. So you have to like fast track this kid. And what they start doing is tracking them a year or two later. But they haven't been able to catch up in 2 years what this kid learned in 4 years. So all the rich, middle-class, white children who have the background are going here, while the less. So we work with a lot of those kids who don't get those early, attention. We have book groups for like literally little kids come and we give them a book and they go home and they read it and they come back and they talk about them, the books. So we try to get them involved in books and conversation about
foreign
books.
language teachers down there.
Yeah, that too.
Yeah, I've seen some classes on writing your own biography.
Yes,
on
for
essays,
adults, we
on-
have every kind of writing
writing
classes.
the novel, writing the short story, science
Right.
fiction.
Writing
it runs a lot of stuff.
nonfiction, memoir.
Memoir, yeah.
yeah.
I've seen a lot of that down there. It's great.
Yep.
And even like Tai Chi and yoga classes I've seen in there.
We have done. we try to mix it all with writing. Like yoga and writing really come together very well.
Yeah, because you can get yourself into a state where you're like actually feel settled enough to actually to write. And
you can also open yourself in a way that allows words to come to you and ideas and thoughts. And
one of the nice things, though, I think about that space is that it's such an old building that's full of character.
Yes.
And so when you're in there, there's a feeling of, I don't know, maybe mystique is the wrong word, but it has a sense of old world.
Oh man.
And I mean, high ceilings and all this. And also because the staff is there who are very encouraging, very supportive.
Right. You met
It's just, it's just really, it's a wonderful place.
I've been, like I told you, I never wanted to work for anybody again. I didn't even want like a job that I had to make people work,
Sure.
But that place was so essential to me as a writer. When in 1997, I went there with my idea for Fatherloss. I just said, I got this idea for a book, and they are all like, that's a great idea. And here's the class you should take. And if you don't get that every now and then, somebody going, that's a great idea, and someone reading a chapter and saying, wow, I never thought about it this way, or I never, or that story is told, or I don't get what you're trying to get across over here. That story really loses me, right? All of that kind of feedback got me to the place where I felt like I had a quality book that I could pitch to a New York publisher, and they would be.
Like this looks like he really went the.
Exactly. I got a lot of people. Even my first 25 rejections said, this is a really well-written book proposal. Men don't buy books about emotional things.
Right.
That's pretty much what the feedback.
Well, in your case, because you have focused on that niche that wasn't really there too much before.
It's true.
Probably a lot of publishers just couldn't have the vision of it because it's like there's nothing comparable.
One guy, really a woman got the vision of it, and she tried really hard at this one company. It was a spiritual. Remember Harper San Francisco? They used to do a lot of spiritual books.
Yeah.
And she had really wanted it and thought it was going to be, but she could not get it past their marketing division. They said, we can't market this.
Shooting it down.
We don't have it. Problem was they didn't have a list. They didn't know what men bought books.
Yeah, if it wasn't like hunting or fishing or field and stream
Exactly.
magazines or something.
Like this thing, but men didn't really, and to this day, I think it's bought mostly by women, but 99.9% of the responses I get are from men, and I still get them.
Yeah.
It's not the women.
Because it strikes a
right?
chord with them.
It does.
Yeah.
I think women buy it and then give it to their husbands or
right.
sons.
The men don't go out to the store looking for a book.
Right.
But the thing about a book like that is that men don't necessarily like to talk with other men that much about this sort of thing either. So it was like they could be internal, but still have the camaraderie of other men who had been through it.
See, that is, okay, now that right there is something that's truly fascinating to me because, we've talked a little bit about how men grieve differently, right?
But what I find is also true is that men really, 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 really want to be in the company of other men and they want to have shared experiences and tell tales.
Yeah.
I think they want to tell tales more than, I think women kind of like share experiences more, but I mean,
Right.
men I think are much more anecdotal. Right? You know, I mean, they're like,
Yeah.
well, here's what my dad did to me when I was 5, and then we went down and we fished, and you get that from guys all the time. And so there's something in, like some kind of osmosis in these stories that men start telling, right?
Yeah.
And so I could very well see a lot of men receiving the book from their wives or girlfriends or whatever, reading it and going, man, this is me to a T. I can't believe this.
Yeah.
This is unreal.
Right.
You know,
That's what I hear from them.
Yeah.
Is that, and what I also hear is that they're not being told how to. It's not a book about, here's how you grieve. If you've had this is like 8 steps to better grieving.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that one's just flying off the shelves. I'll tell you.
It's just mostly stories. And
Yeah.
so, and also it's got facts and figures, which I resisted at first because I sent in a proposal that said, I'm going to interview 60 men. They're going to, here's all the different groups, demographics and all that. And the first, and I was getting a no, and this woman really wanted it, but she wasn't going to do anything. But when this man about, 6 months later finally went, I really like this, but what it needs is a survey so that I have numbers so that men will look at the numbers. I resisted that and I said, men don't need numbers. We're much more advanced. And however, he said, I'm not doing it unless you do it. And so I had to spend another 6 months hiring somebody and walking through a whole survey. But the data that I got from that was so valuable and allowed me to hook any story on without it being just like a story in the middle of the air.
Mm-hmm.
I could say 70% of men, dreamed about their fathers after his death and then tell a story. And then men who dreamed about their fathers were like, well, that's not so weird. I thought mine was weird. Or it was one of those really vivid dreams that men talk about every now and then that they had that was like the closure dream. Well, it turns out, 10 men I talked to had one of those where I've never had such one where I actually felt the touch and I saw him in a bus and I waved to him, It was like the goodbye that I never got to say or
like
whatever
the mind
it
had
was.
finally processed it enough, and here I'm
Right,
letting you
and
know that
this. And so
this
people were
download
like,
is complete or
this is what
whatever.
happens. And and I also think people allow themselves to, when they read a book like that, to believe that they have depth to them.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of men think they're just like up here. I'm shallow, I don't really think about anything. But then they get brought down there and go, well, I have thought about that, or that is part of who and it's a validation.
Well, I think we're told that a lot.
Yeah,
You
we're
know.
told to be.
Yeah, we're told, hey,
do.
intelligence-wise, you're okay.
Yeah.
Emotional intelligence, now you're way down here on the
Yeah.
bottom rung.
Don't.
And in terms of cleanliness and hygiene, you're really far down.
Right.
Right. It's
Right.
like that tier.
Right.
And then we walk around going, okay, well, I guess it's true.
Right.
And then something cracks open, and then it's like, wait a minute, I do have this language, but it's not the language that that she hears.
One of my favorite authors, one of my, what I would say, inspirations is Studs Terkel.
Oh, yeah.
He was a radio guy from Chicago, but
Sure.
a writer. And what he understood before anybody else was that the language that people use, not their ideas necessarily, although that's important, but the specific words. So when he tells more, or at least adds like multiple layers. So if you might remember a book called Working, that was the one that he interviewed like 300 men and a few women, but I think almost all men, about what jobs they did. And instead of just saying, tell me a little bit about your job, blah, 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 he would get into it. They're like, tell me about your boss. My boss is an asshole. Tell me about this person. Oh, I hate this. I'm like an automaton. So he would get them in a bar deep into, I hate this little piece of shit. I go into that place and I feel like crap and it stinks and it's, and you get the whole, and then, but I'm doing it because, and then you get that whole story. And my father was like
video.
this.
What catch him on video saying it.
So he just have these beautiful, complete, just quotes. And he put a little thing at the top that said, Joe Schmo, pipe fitter, 37 years, south side of Chicago, 3 kids,
Yeah.
a wife.
Yeah, and it's
Boom.
just like I'm reporting.
And he would just
Yeah.
let them talk. Well, that's the homage that I paid to him in both of these books is that I just taped men. Instead of talking about working, I had them talking about dying, or their fathers dying, and work and relationships, that being married. And just give it to me in your words.
Right.
And then I tried to use like sections of their words. Like this one guy who talked about sex as like marriage is like a machine, and sex is like the grease in the machine. It's kind of running all the time, it's clinking and clanking, and there's like sand and rocks and stuff, but the sex just makes it all run kind of more smoothly.
Right.
Now, when I tell women that, they are like appalled
Right.
that a man or anyone would talk about sex like grease in a machine. But
Yeah.
men who are into engineering, which he was, thought of it as a machine, and this is kind of the way we get. Now, I think he got divorced soon after that.
Right.
So, I'm not after saying that. I didn't
We're not
report it to his
surprised.
wife.
We're not-
But I do see that, men have this way of thinking. You can go, well, there's what's wrong with that guy, or you can say, that's a fascinating way of describing marriage.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the way I began to realize that Studs Terkel could get people to talk about working. I could get people to talk about their fathers, their wives, how they grieved, things that were unspoken.
Well, I have to say, the surveys that are in the survey that's in that book and then the other book too, both
Yeah.
gave a lot more
Well,
for me.
I'll tell him he was right.
Yeah, and it wasn't anything about like, well, I doubt his author.
Right. It just
You know,
gives
his-
you like a structure almost to like, okay, now, or just maybe if it doesn't, fit,
Right, and
you
like
go,
how-
why would that?
Yeah, and at least, and there's some measure,
Yeah,
because,
just enough.
yeah,
I agree now. I just didn't agree when I had to work from 6 more months before,
it'd be a lot of commitment to, I'm sure that took.
Yeah,
a hell of
I
a long
wrote
time.
2 books, and part of the reason why I haven't written another one is because it was as if I got a dissertation, like a PhD
Yeah.
each time I did it.
It's like going back and doing another degree.
Yeah.
I mean, I've done a bunch of degrees now, and every time I go back, I'm so excited to start on this degree. And then about a year, and I'm like, why the hell did I start on this degree?
Yeah, and it takes
It's just like,
those are 3 to 4 year projects, not to mention once you get the publisher involved, then they're going to be, heavily influencing in where it goes. So,
see, something that struck me was,
You form your relationships, it seems, based on the most outlandish, sometimes inane things. I have a really vivid memory of watching the original Parent Trap. And I've seen that movie probably 10 or 15 times over the years. And there's a scene, and I think, probably everybody watching has seen that movie. There's a scene where she's come back to the house, the daughters have done their stuff, and he's acting like he wants to reunite with her, and he says something to the effect of, well, I miss you being around, and I miss me saying certain things and you acting appalled at it. Right? And I remember this like light bulb going off and going, wow, this whole time I thought, women are really appalled, and probably they are appalled at a lot of male behavior.
Yeah.
But at the same time, there's some kind of payoff in the act of going, I'm appalled, and the indignation that comes from that, and the, and by the way, to the ladies out there, I'm not saying that's the only reason. I'm sure he was doing something horrible, but I think there is a power exchange that goes on there. I'm sure learned genetically or from mother or somebody.
And like you were saying earlier, there's trying to get you to be less appalling is one of their great.
Right. Well, and then I think men go one of 2 ways after that. They either go, well, I'll try my best not to do that again, I swear,
Right.
Or then you have the other guys like, sure, whatever.
Yeah. Or you
it's-
get the third one who's like, well, I'm going to do it anyway.
Right.
just
since you
piss
said
you
it.
off.
Just when
Which is gonna
Those
be
are
a
the guys
very
we
short
read
marriage.
about. They're,
Those are the
they're-
latest December
yeah.
marriages.
I think I saw that guy in the bar last month. Those are those guys. Yeah.
Third one.
But it's, it's interesting how you can have these really super poignant moments just, out of nowhere.
Yeah.
I mean, for me, a lot of it's film just because I grew up watching so many movies.
Mm-hmm.
But probably for other guys, like I never was into sports that big. Probably for some guys, it's like sitting on the baseball diamond and going, oh, wow, that just occurred to me. And you get these,
Epiphany.
these yeah, exactly. I mean, it's strange. I had a few things, I just taken some notes, and I'm not going to ask you to quote anything here, but, okay, so in one of the things in Fatherloss, it said, sons 33 to 55,
Okay.
acutely, they're feeling their mortality after their father's deaths more than the other groups.
Yeah.
And then, and the question I was going to have was, do you think that's coupled with something they would be experiencing in middle age anyway? I mean, because I've had this, I think it's more of a theory. I think it's probably almost provable where, you start to hit around 40-ish,
Yeah.
35 to 45.
Absolutely.
And it's like, there's something internally that's going on where you're going, it's half over.
Yeah.
And mortality is like really setting, not in the, I'm 15 years old and somebody just told me about, French philosophy and I'm over here reading some dark stuff or whatever, or being a goth person or something like that. But like, oh, it really is. Yeah, it's half over. And it might even be sooner than that if I get hit by a pie wagon or something or whatever.
I think it's part of it.
It's it's a piece of the accumulation of things that happen in your 40-ish time period where you do realize, 40 and 80 and, you're not going to live to maybe you'll get to 100, but it'll be a rough last 20 years. And do you want to be there? And so, you start going at 40 that this is where I'm half done. When you lose your father in that period, it is the extra hammer.
Yeah.
It's the thing that says, hey, it's not just a little maybe, because again, you're going 40, 80, blah, blah, blah. You're going, oh, there's the guy. He's dead. There's no one between me
It's like a
and
double
the
tap.
end.
Yeah.
He's 20
So
years
for
old.
me, I have not yet had the, my father has died, and therefore that book is the book I'm reading right now, because my dad's 87.
Neil, you wrote this book.
I know.
It's-
Yesterday, I went into a bookstore and I found a copy of it and I bought it. It was used.
I'm going to improve my sales.
No, the reason why I bought it is because it was one of the hardcovers, and I can't get them anymore. They're not in
Oh,
print.
really?
And
Okay.
I found it in a used bookstore
Oh,
for
cool.
$6, and I said, I'm going to buy me a, and it was signed by the author. But no.
Who is this guy that signed this?
Yeah, but but that book has been really helpful actually to me all through.
Yeah.
Ever since I started writing that book, all the way through to this day, that book, more helpful than that book.
Yeah, because you wrote it like almost 20 years ago, but it's like you're living out.
I'm living through
It's almost prophetic
the
in a way.
entire period, including the last chapter, which is about what I learned from those 60 men and all the, about being a good father. My son was, 6 years old when I was writing that book, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I was like, what do you do to be a good father? And I got to talk to like 60 men directly and say, by the way, what did your father tell you? When was your father at his very best?
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I asked every single man that question. They all gave me a really interesting answer. Some, all over the place. But fathers are at their best when there's some kind of affection, and doesn't have to be physical, but like some kind of,
Like I am connected
I
to you in
see
some
you.
way.
not you
Oh, okay.
go do, will you come with me and do what I want you to do? Affection is when he went, what do you want to do? You like baseball? Oh, you like football? All right, let's play football. That's affection.
So it's like a tacit blessing.
That's number 2.
That's number 2,
Blessing.
blessing. Okay.
Blessing.
Okay.
And that comes a little bit later. But so what I like the way I saw it was that in the first, say, 10 years of your life, what the son really needs is the father to just be present, close, physically there, read to him,
He's watching,
on top of
figuring out what I need to do.
I think we keep fathers away a bit more, but moms get that, all that. I think men need to be closer in that early period. I do, I think. But at the very least, all that kind of affection that comes from being present with and not being my thing to do, but I'm being with you and doing what you want to do and learning who you are and valuing you. People, I know there's people out there that go, there's way too, giving that kid too much. No, I don't believe that. I believe you are as affectionate as possible. Between 10 and 20, and even all the way into young adulthood, you're blessing the child. You're saying, yes, you're ready at 13 to go out and do this. Yes, you're ready at 15 to go out and do this. Yes, you can drive. Yes, you can have sex with other, with people. Yes, you can go away and be on your own. Yes, you're a full man.
Yeah.
Then I believe the third thing that you get, and that almost everybody told me, is that at the end of life, do that part well. Even as the father, don't.
The blessing.
No, even as a blessing, at the end, just say goodbye. Don't just disappear. I mean, you could die of a heart attack, but I mean, if you don't die of a heart attack, don't just ignore what's happening, but realize this is the end. I'm going to say goodbye to you. I'm going to, tell you everything that I haven't told you that I need to tell you before I die, including I'm proud of you, if I haven't said that enough times yet. And you will leave that child, no matter where, in much better shape if you do those three things for them. So, and there's a whole bunch of stuff within that. I mean, you can decide what affection is, you can decide what blessing is, and you can decide what closure at the end of your life is. But everyone I talked to fell into those categories when they said, my father, he didn't do anything for me when I was a kid, he treated me like shit, but at the end of his life, he apologized, and that was enough.
Yeah.
This one guy took his father like 20 years. His father was a doctor, the son wasn't in any of that stuff, he wanted to be a carpenter. Kicked the son out, never saw him, never said anything to him. Toward the end of his life, the father came to see the son, saw that he built like gorgeous staircases.
Oh, I read that, the woodworker.
The woodworker.
Yeah, right.
Saw these things and he just went,
They said, I
"Whoa,
underestimated you.
I underestimated you,"
Yeah.
was his line. And that was all it took.
Yeah.
I underestimated
That's
you.
very cool, yeah.
And so that closed them, so he was okay. His father even sent him like tools at the end of his life, as his gifts. And so there was that connection. So even though his father had treated him like shit when he was young, and been an alcoholic, and not closed up, at the end of his life, he had realized it and made peace. And so the son was able to. And that's what I think we're trying to do, isn't it? When we raise children, is we want them to be at peace when we die.
Yeah.
As opposed to be roiled up and be angry and to hate us.
Independence and then an okayness.
Yeah.
Right.
And to feel like when they think about us, they smile. Instead of thinking about saying, what a jerk.
Yeah, my
I wish
life's
that- yeah.
crap because
Right,
of it.
because of him. But instead they go, God, my dad, he was a card.
Oh, yeah.
He would do weird shit. My son would say for the rest of his life, my dad, oh my God, he was a character.
Yeah, right.
He used to do these things. But overall, he was a good parent. That's
Yeah,
what my
right.
kid would say.
Right.
That's good enough. I'll take that.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great.
A great review.
Yeah, it is.
At the review
well,
board.
what's better than that, really?
Right.
I mean,
It is true. Actually, what's best is the other day, he went out and got a degree, and then at New York University, NYU, and then he went into like deep, dark corporate America. He wasn't planning on it, but he got out.
He got
and they were
sucked
like,
in.
"We liked you. We'll pay you $75,000." So he went, "Yeah, okay, I'll do that." After 2 years, it was like he could not get out of there faster.
oh yeah.
And he's now, I shit you not, he's now writing. He's taken a year off to write about that experience that he just went through, which included phenomenal stories that if you
Probably a lot
imagine.
of people identify with.
Yeah, I mean,
Because-
there's a whole group of kind of, what do they call them? They're in like Deloitte and McKinsey and kind of these consultants. They basically are like business consultants to massive businesses, and they charge hundreds of millions of dollars to do gargantuan projects. But those projects include take this company and fire 700 people.
Right, yeah.
Mergers and acquisitions.
Mergers, yeah.
So he had to
Went
do
and
some
chop
of
it
that.
up. Yeah.
And one of his favorite, or the worst, was a chicken plant, the Tyson chicken plant,
Oh, wow.
disassembly. That's where he kind of got to the place where he went, it's over my beak now.
Just can't
I'm
do
outta
it
here.
anymore.
So he came home and he said, but the other day he said, I've been applying for new jobs and there's this one and man, there was this one and there's that one. He goes, man, this would be easier if I didn't have a conscience.
Yeah.
And I was like, you know what? My job's done.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
If you've got a conscience and you're 25,
Yeah.
all my money is well spent.
Yeah, what
Just
more
pretty
can
much
you
what
do?
could, that's what I couldn't ask for anything more.
Yeah.
Yeah, he has a conscience. So,
You know what that reminded me of was Pretty Woman. You remember that where Richard Gere is the mergers and acquisitions guy and he's making billions
yes,
every year and then he runs into Julia Roberts and
she takes him down and said, no,
yeah, she takes
Yeah.
him down and kind of brings him back to being human.
yeah,
And then as he gets more human, it's like he can't do
Can't
what
do
he's
what
been
he's
doing.
doing.
He can't.
Yeah.
And then in the end, he's like getting ready to take over that company and chop it up and all this stuff. And he says, you know, I think I'd rather work with you.
Yeah.
We're going to start building some cool things.
yeah,
And I mean, that's what that sounds like. It's almost like, you know,
Yeah.
his humanness was restored, which he had been longing for, but trying to convince himself he didn't need.
I think George Clooney was in a movie, remember, where he would just fly from place to place and fire people and then go back to another.
I don't remember that one.
It was called, I think it was called Up in the Air. And it was.
That sounds good.
Yeah, it was a good.
I'll look for him.
He was really good in it too, and he was like, except his marriage was falling apart, I think, and his integrity was being challenged.
Right.
But he had this Clooney face, and he was just so had to do it. And he did it so smoothly, and he made them almost like happy that he was.
Yeah.
But he
Like
was
business was great, but
he was just dying
as a human,
inside.
yeah, right.
Yeah.
He was withering.
Withering. Yeah.
Isn't that, it's just amazing how that happens. You know?
Yeah. I think
It's like you can't fool your own body and soul,
No.
but we're so encouraged to.
And if you
Right.
do, you probably will hurt in some deep way, and maybe physically, and die early.
Yeah. I'm sorry, man. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, I was just going to say, you were talking earlier about, these different stories from these different guys and, the experiences that they had. And you feel like any of those things were ritualistic in a sense, like you've got to have these certain things from your father and their common, through these different stories, there are all these commonalities and
Yep.
they're, in some
As a father, is that what you mean, like, or commonalities in how
in a sense that we're ritualistic beings, that we need these certain things in one fashion or another to.
I do think there is a powerful story to me about the Jewish tradition that I don't follow, but it's called Kaddish, where after a loved one dies, you spend like 7 or 8 days at home, in your home, you like cover up mirrors, everything is revolving around that person, and you really think about it, you dive into it. You don't do like a quickie funeral,
glossy.
and you all drink up enough and then you move out. You sit for like 6 or 7 days with people coming all the time, and then you go, and then if you do it according to them, you go every day for an entire year and say the same prayer every day for a year, and then your grieving is done. And the people that I talk to who have done that say it works. And sometimes that's what you were saying, almost like the relativism is when you've gotten 5,000 years of what works, and all of us go, yeah, really, it's going to work to go and say blah, blah, blah every single day. Yeah, really.
That's old.
Have you ever
school.
tried it?
That's what Grandma likes. That's
Exactly. And the hell, it works.
It does
At
work.
the end of it, you're no longer grieving because you've ritualized it in your body in a way that you have really probably integrated that person. And that's probably what it is. When you don't love that person who's dead, even though you want to, then every time you think about him, you don't. You push it away and you think negatively. Once you can integrate them, think about them, then you start smiling. You realize, hey, I can think about them in a positive way. That's what I'm taking in. But you can't get there until you deal with the negative. And there's even a few people in there who, after their father died, it's harder, much harder, but after they did the ritualistic work that they had to do. In the men's weekends, there were a lot of men who had to deal with their fathers.
A lot of work around dad, yeah.
Who are dead.
Sure.
I've got to go back now and undo the damage they did without them there. And that's
No, there are a lot of
it's
those
definitely
that
possible. But
and what's interesting is that's when you're watching that during the weekend. That's just
Yeah.
I mean, it everybody's like, wow, man, that's really something.
and it is kind of hard to believe what some fathers do to their sons or their children.
It's hard to believe what people do to people in general.
Yeah.
I mean,
Just almost
I mean,
practically amazing.
it's something like when
But
I
to
was
your father, to your own blood, flesh and blood.
when I was down at the Carnegie Center the other day doing that clinic.
Yeah.
I had those 5 ladies there. They were really sweet. And we started talking about some of the realities of self-defense. And of course, they're going, oh, I could never put a finger in an eyeball, and things like that. And that's usually the response you get,
Yeah.
not just from women.
Right.
Because if you're a healthy individual, that sort of thing disgusts you,
Exactly.
right? And
Exactly.
you should not go there. Like in your practice with martial arts, you should not get so aggressive that now we enjoy inflicting pain.
Right.
No, the whole idea is to stop violence, which was the original idea in martial arts.
Right.
The bujutsu, stop the violence, and the budo. So it's like you have to train people to be able to think that way, and then it's almost like unselling it afterward. You have to say, no, I don't want you to think that way.
Exactly.
And the reason you have to do that, though, is not to gross them out. It's because that's the way the criminal element thinks. Your average woman who walks out of here, she doesn't go, well, there could be a guy over there who's been waiting for the last hour for me to come out.
Right.
And he's waiting, that light's out in the parking lot. And, they don't think that way.
Yeah, and even when they, and they're not, right.
No.
People don't see, the necessity of mitigating violence with violence.
No. And people who have not experienced true violence,
Right.
this is another really important point.
No, I agree with you.
Is people who have not experienced it can't fathom it.
Exactly.
What they know of violence is mostly through art and culture. I watched a movie, I saw Silence of the Lambs, and that's violence to me. Right. Or whatever. That is not violence.
It's not violence until you feel the fist on your face.
Yeah,
And you feel the kick on your body.
and internally, this is why so many victims turn to anger, because if we look at, you were talking about the 4 or 5 major emotions.
Right.
If we take anger and we say, well, what is anger really? What is it really?
Hurt.
Well, it's really about boundaries, isn't it? Somebody crossed my boundary, and I don't like that. I didn't give them permission to.
Right.
And so what happens? Well, I get perpetrated upon, right, in some fashion. And then I'm going to either become a perp myself after that, or I'm going to be extremely angry, or I can't deal with my own anger, therefore I'm going to transmute it into sadness or some other emotion.
Or I'm going to go hide in my house.
Or I'm
and
going
never
to,
come out.
yeah, which is fear,
Yeah.
right, which will be another one of the emotions, right?
Right.
So, you really have to look at that and say, what is this really? And that's one thing I love about the work and that in general, and breaking that down that way, because each of those major groups, they're all about, there are actions internally. So, sadness would be more about, well, that is to do with the past.
Yeah.
I never have gone, man, I'm really sad about tomorrow, right? That doesn't work, does it? No, sadness is about loss. I lost something. And then, with fear, that's about the future.
Yeah.
So scared about that interview tomorrow. Shame is more about, well, internally, I really don't feel okay. Like there's something wrong with me, and so, and then of course, happy, the way I like to think of it is it's an absence of those others. That's my true state. But these others have been clouding it up, and I can't see my true state. And so, I think that is so valuable to people because it gives them a concrete map
Right.
to go internally.
I agree.
But, if you start saying, well, there's 4,000 emotions, and you can't,
No.
the mind can't do that.
And we're not even, and we're taught early on, not to, we're not even taught the name of the emotion.
Right.
So
Yeah.
we're just whoever we are blurting out. But then
Yeah.
girls start being taught, oh, don't be so angry, don't do it. And boys are like, just don't cry.
Yeah, right.
You can even be sad, just don't cry in public at least.
Sure.
And so, how many times did you go, get away, not so nobody, and then you become pretty good at it.
Yeah.
I probably go months, if not years,
Probably
between
also good.
cries now.
Yeah, and by that, I trust you mean honest cries.
Yeah.
Every now and then I'll be watching a movie and I'll be going, oh, God, I can't believe that happened. To me, that's not really an honest.
No, I know.
That's not I feel it down in my gut and
Yeah.
lower.
Right.
This is coming up, God.
But if it is, then I'll probably try one of my guy things to turn it off and to try to
Right.
find some
Somebody watching.
way.
It's like, got to cover it real quick. But I think it's back to that thing about longing for whatever we're told we shouldn't have.
Yeah.
We're trying to balance it out. So if you are a young girl and somebody says, it's really okay for you to be sad, go over there and cry for a while, but don't get angry.
Yeah.
And what do you have? A whole lot of women who grow up being angry, but they can't, there's no expression for that in our culture, really. Not
And
unless
you
you
get-
get some girlfriends and.
And you do get a lot of women that I've seen, as you know, there's a lot of women who work with me, and they they are very apologetic.
Mhm.
That's the thing that I'm always like, the first line might be, oh, I'm sorry to this, I'm sorry to bother you, I'm sorry to go there, I'm sorry to do
Right.
this, I'm sorry. And I'm like, first of all, how many times do I say it's okay to bother me? You're allowed to knock on the door, just tick, tick, boom, not tick, tick. I'm sorry to da. That just takes more of my time.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
But really what it is, it's more of the approach that is an apology, as opposed to, I have a question for you.
Mhm.
Could you, even that is in your power, not that kind of thing. So I see a lot of women apologizing for their presence.
So let me ask you this. Do you think, given what we talked about regarding projection earlier, if you have ladies who are in a state of anger, but
Yes.
trying their best to not let it explode and not let it turn into a big brouhaha,
Yes,
but it is slipping out sideways in many different ways that I'm sure we all can imagine.
yeah.
And then they come to a guy and they say, look, I'm really sorry about this, but I needed to ask you. Is that you think sometimes them projecting onto you that you're going to be angry
Yeah.
about? Yeah. So,
Yeah.
in the same way that, because
That
we're
they're
told we're not allowed to be sad,
Yeah,
but it's okay, little Johnny, go be angry,
yeah.
Yeah,
And they're probably afraid, right? I have done my best in all my relationships with women, my wife, family, to not be a, menacing,
right.
to not have, obviously I'm not gonna, really make you feel menaced.
Yeah, before we continue on, we wanted to make sure to have a nice word from our sponsors. We'll be back in just a moment. And we're back.
Wow.
Once again, talking with Neil Chethik about Fatherloss, his first book that he wrote, which is excellent. And we're going to have a future session with Neil where we'll be talking about his second book, which he wrote not too long after Fatherloss, Voicemale. And so definitely join us on that one. It's going to be a whole lot of fun. I did have So one thing in this book that was really interesting to me was you kind of broke apart types of grieving sons. And it was kind of neat because they were all started with D,
Yeah.
which made it real easy. I made it easy.
It's so I can remember 'em.
Yeah. So you had dashers,
Dashers.
delayers, displayers, and doers.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's,
So dashers are those people that you see them at the funeral and they're like, hey, how you doing? Nice to see you. I'm glad you made it to the funeral. And that kind of thing. Because they've dashed through their grief faster than you can imagine. Usually dashers are actually delayers. And
okay.
what happens is they stuff it down somewhere, or they make it through the weekend, or they make it through a month or even a year, or maybe 5 or 10 years, because they're really good at that kind of thing. But somewhere along the line, as you know, emotional distress has its day. It will either come boiling up out of you and you will be an angry person, or it will stay inside and you'll be a sick person and you'll get an ulcer or cancer or whatever that might be related to the stresses of keeping those kind of things hidden. So the displayer is someone that's closer to the way we stereotypically think of women, expressing their emotion through tears, through words. They want to talk about it. And that's maybe 20%. In fact, each of those is about 20%. Dashers, delayers, and then displayers. Doers are the biggest chunk, I found. And these are the people who do things as a way of letting out the energy. We spoke earlier about how there's that tension that happens in our bodies, quite literally a tension that happens within us that we're trying to release during grieving. And tears gets that out, and some of us go to that. But if you ask men about it, they will often say, I didn't grieve because they didn't cry, but I would listen to my father's records and think about him.
Mhm.
And I felt better afterwards. And then I'd do it the next time, and I'd feel even a little better. And then the next time. And so, okay, you didn't have tears, but you listened to a record. That's grieving if over time that's what helps you get to the place where you start thinking about the dead person
it's
with a
encouraging
smile.
the process. Like
Right.
It's processing.
So it's processing the way men process. Since tears have been sort of beaten out of us, if not literally, at least figuratively beaten out of us, most of us don't have easy access. We don't just burst into tears over it. So we have to do things, and we will do things, and often it's just a natural. The man who built the urn for his father, men who often take the clothes that their fathers leave them and wear them, and then gradually give them away until they have no more clothes, maybe just one t-shirt.
Yeah.
But it's
Wow.
like each time they're shedding a little bit of the grief. So it's almost beautiful and poetic in the way that men do it, but they have no idea often that they're doing it. And they often think, oh, there's something wrong with me because I'm not crying.
Right.
So that is one of the things that really struck me about the styles and the doing being okay, and then not having people say to you, "Have you cried? If you haven't, what's wrong with you?" Or you say to yourself those things, but instead you might notice it and say, "But I also feel like I'm letting this kind of stuff out in another way." If 6 months go by, 12 months go by, you're still angry, you don't want to be at work, you're depressed, you hate your kids, okay, you're not grieving right.
Right.
But most of us find a right way to grieve, and it includes things that touch the memory. It's like every time you touch the memory, you let a little bit of that tension out. So it's
Like it sort of disempowers that
yes.
really stark image, whatever it is. Or
It's
feeling.
one of those psychological processes that we don't really understand, but it's like if you have a problem in your life and you find to sort of go back to the source of it, the problem will sometimes go away. You just have to understand the source of it.
Yeah.
not
Like the
necessarily
mind
even
can grapple.
do anything
Right.
with the source of it. It's
Right.
just, where'd that come from? Oh, it came from there. Well, then your mind starts doing something that heals itself.
Right.
Yeah.
But
Right.
until you when you shut off and don't go back to those places, or if you lose your father and never think about it. I mean, you probably read where some of the children who lost their fathers have no capability to grieve. They just, Dad's here, I'm 4, he's gone the next day, never see him again.
Mm-hmm.
Words, people, dead body, parents crying, what's up? I don't know. And then years later, they're like, boom, you know, because something happened and they couldn't do anything with it. One kid talks about being 9 years old, and when he was 19, he drank so much he went into a catatonic state, and for 70-something hours, he just
Wow.
sat there. And that was the beginning of his recovery. That was just to tell him, hey, you need to stop and deal with this shit.
Yeah.
And he lost his father when he was 9. He had just boom, 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 went into the military. So he was just going to keep it going. And in the military, he drank so heavily one day that he went crazy, more or less. And then went into this, and it was on the anniversary of his father's death.
Oh.
He had
What
no
a
idea,
coincidence.
no idea until he realized.
Yeah.
So again, you're like, we do things. We're open books in a way if you just look at how we actually act.
Yeah. And like our spouses can read us, but sometimes we can't read ourselves.
That is true. That is true.
It's
We
a-
think we know
We
ourselves
can't read our
really
own
well.
book.
No, that's what I mean. You start telling me things here about this, what you saw in there. It's like, I didn't even know I said that. You know, I don't even know that I meant that, and I might not have meant that. But you got it.
But
You
yeah,
got something from it,
that's
so.
some of the beauty of the
Right.
subjectivity of language, though.
Exactly.
Is that, you're kind of getting to the meaning, like in the ballpark,
Exactly.
but not
Or
necessarily down to
more
the,
so, I say this, and you are interested in that part.
Mhm.
So that's what brings you, but I'm over here thinking this is my main part.
Right.
But you say, no,
Yeah.
wait, no, I saw that. That's
Or I have an agenda and I see what I want to see.
Right.
And whatever you said. Which sums up Politico.
yeah. I don't read Politico.
Talking about wasting time right there. Yeah. There's one final thing I was going to mention in the book that you had put in. I think you were quoting a man, and it was kind of a nice phrase. He was talking about he had preserved the father space inside me, and about the relationship with Dad going on even though Dad is gone.
Yeah.
So it's like this, in the living world, one-sided relationship, or we couldn't look at it that way,
You could look at it that
or
way.
there is.
There's a man I remember who was like 92, and he still would sit in his chair when he needed advice. His father had been dead like 60 years.
Mm-hmm.
And his dad died when he was like 50. This guy's 92. He would go back and channel his father to get his
talk to him.
father's advice. Yeah,
Yeah.
he'd sit in that chair and he'd say, okay, here's the question. And he would literally have that question just go through his mind over and over and over again. He'd say it over and over again, and then he'd wait.
Yeah.
And then he would hear from a man he hadn't heard from and, hadn't actually seen in person for 60 years, who is 40 years younger than he is now when he died. So he couldn't have been as wise as this 90-year-old, but somehow the 90-year-old thought the 52-year-old was still his big, strong father who knew everything.
In some sense, I think he's kind of channeling this idea of ancestral knowledge that, you're the culmination even of
Yep.
past dead relatives, and that you can draw, I guess, on some kind of wisdom that's ingrained in your DNA that's been passed along, for generations.
I think it can be that subtle, that it's in your DNA, and it's like when you were saying you meet somebody and then you just judge them on the thinnest little, but yet that thin thing might be just something that the way they move their eyes that tells you so much about them.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's
Right.
like the way they move their eyes tells you everything about their personality that you couldn't put into words,
Yeah.
but you know that somebody who looks the way in their eyes like that is the kind of person that
Yeah,
you
it's
get along with.
like seeming to be minutiae,
Yeah,
but there are heavy inferences drawn from
right,
that. Yeah.
right. It seems to be small, but you have to trust it's really, really big, especially if it's something like that happens and then you end up married to them like I have for 35 years. You can't go, wait a minute. She had long, beautiful hair. I decided to marry her on that.
But,
But you know, I mean, probably that had something to do with keeping the tribe going. And you know what I mean? I mean, there's probably
No.
something in
Yeah,
that where,
yeah.
you know, I mean,
Even
oh,
though-
she looks a little bit like so-and-so, and so-and-so's already in the tribe, and we want to perpetuate the tribe.
Except from a pure tribal standpoint, it has nothing to do with like a Jewish tribe. She's a non-Jew, but there's some tribe that's
Right, I'm
like
talking genetic. I'm talking, yeah, not,
Yeah.
I just mean in that tribal
Right.
sense of like,
Sometimes people
Yeah.
refer to the Jewish.
As a
No,
tribal kind of thing, yeah.
no.
But that's interesting because she came from an extremely heavy Catholic background.
Mm-hmm.
So when we got together, we were both deeply spiritual, but non-religious.
Mhm.
She ended up becoming a minister. in the-
Right, yeah,
in
she
the
is
Unitarian
the
Church.
minister at the Unitarian Church. Isn't it?
Was.
Okay,
Yeah,
she's no
she
longer,
did that.
okay.
She only did that for about 8 or 9 years.
Yeah,
She now is, and then she went on to become a fundraiser actually for that church nationally, just traveling, doing that. And then she became a state representative.
right.
So now
She's currently
currently
a state,
state rep. Like, wow.
yeah.
Yeah.
Kelly Flood. Right. Kelly
Yep,
Flood.
yep. So yeah, she's very lucky to have stumbled into her 37 years ago or whenever it was, because she's just, you know, you got I hit the freaking lottery.
that's the way I feel about my wife. Yeah, it's nice. And I think it's interesting just to say one more thing about the eye, you know, the eye and
Yeah.
what you were talking about.
Yeah.
I think you can have somebody and you see them and you're like, oh wow, that one piece really is attractive to me.
Right.
And that becomes the piece that draws you to them. And yet they might look like 99% different than anyone in your genetic tribe.
Yeah.
And so as a result, you know, all of this, you know, the gene pool, you know, you know what I mean? I mean, it's interesting because I think we do focus in on one or two things and then sort of create a story around it. You know,
Maybe.
yeah. I mean, it's-
Yeah.
I mean, or I could see that being the case. Like, I think you had that in
Oh,
Voicemaile about a guy who's basically saw a woman's ankle.
Yes.
And, you know, and he's like, wow, that ankle really is doing it for me. And then,
And he followed her.
and then yeah, he followed her around, and then all of a sudden he's married, you know.
But I mean, it's kind of the way it happens, you know.
It is pretty much how it happens, and then you like that ankle a lot for the rest of your relationship.
Yeah.
You know,
It's
you're
like
look at that
ankle's
ankle.
real
Yeah.
special.
And if that ankle goes bad,
Yeah, she got her leg cut off. Oh no.
I do remember one guy in that one. I would say, "Well, what about when they start getting the gray hair and the wrinkles and this?" And he was like, "I just think I put those gray hairs there. I put some." Yeah, he's like,
Yeah, you're responsible for at least some of
I'm
them.
keeping her. So
Oh, that's funny. That's awesome.
Well, in the interest of time, folks, we're going to go ahead and wrap it up with Neil for tonight. We will be having him on for a future episode. Once again, please go look for Fatherloss. It's an excellent book, and while you're at it, you may as well check out Voicemaile, which is, when did this come out? Like in
2006.
2006. So it's been out for a while. You should be very easily able to find it. Amazon, local bookstore, you know, any place that's halfway literary, you're going to hopefully find that.
Yeah.
And it's been a real pleasure having Neil on. And as important, please go check out the Carnegie Center for Literacy and Learning. If you don't live in our area, which is Lexington, Kentucky, then consider donating to the center. They do some mighty fine work there, and we're really blessed to have them. There's not a place like that in every city that is so vast in its scope regarding literacy and a lot of other things. So they're really trying to do some good work. So help them out. You can find them if you go to Google Carnegie Center for Literacy and Learning, or just look up Neil's name, Neil Chethik, and you'll certainly find them. And I'm sure there's information where you can donate your time, money, whatever. So it's been a pleasure having you on tonight. And
Pleasure
Neil,
being
we
here.
thank you
Both
so
of you.
much for
Enjoyed
being
it.
here, and we really look forward to the next time. There's so much more to talk about.
Yeah.
And we didn't even get into writing or your other book, so, but we would have been here another
We did
3
talk-
hours or
right.
something, so.
Yeah, we gotta stop it sometime.
Yeah, no, so it's great. So signing off, till next time, Sebastian and Sierp, I'm Chip Sebastian, and that is
Aaron Sierp?
Aaron Sierp,
That's
Sebastian and Sierp.